Chapter 791. Based on a certain calculation method that the current generation of Federation scientists could not fully grasp, the Federation central computer would sometimes calculate some vague results. The way the results were described was vague and mysterious, and even the calculation method was self-named by it as cloud or chaos, and other such nonsensical terms. For example, on a certain night Sulu had completely forgotten, on the frontline planet in the Westwoods, the old guy who lacked enough information for analysis, once used a similar program to calculate an opinion that was very similar to the Empire's understanding. He believed that it was difficult for him and Jian Shui'er to be together. At that time the old guy did not explain, but according to his calculation, Sulu and Jian Shui'er were very likely to have some kind of blood relationship. This was a probabilistic inference, but it was not just a probabilistic inference. The process was faint and mysterious, like reaching out to pick a white cloud in the blue sky without leaving a trace. At this time in the underground sewers of the capital, the central computer of the Federation said that it was going crazy. It was probably an exposition with the flavor of a mysterious prophet. But unfortunately, this spiritual self-analysis that was full of the flavor of life did not attract much attention from Sulu again, because in the past few years, he had heard the old thing express itself with a strong human flavor many times. As that great self-consciousness gradually took shape in the core of the Bureau of Proclamation and countless stars, the changes of the Federal Central Computer were natural in his eyes. His strong nerves allowed him to bear and gradually get used to this fact that could change the course of the universe and human life, but also made him subconsciously ignore many details. This was probably the instinctive choice of low-level naked apes to protect themselves and avoid madness. But many days later, when Sulu recalled the conversation in the underground sewer, he could not help but feel regret that he missed something. An old Empire pirate spaceship, escorted by two Federation Light Feather-class warships, was advancing toward the distant stars. The pirate spaceship belonged to the Empire's underground resistance organization. Out of some diplomatic etiquette or simply because of the goodwill of the Federation government, the Federation soldiers did not board the spaceship. But Mr. Muen still felt very nervous. His slender hand slowly stroked his smooth mink coat, forcibly restraining his gaze from looking to the right front. On the right front was the monitoring seat of the life support system of the pirate ship. A thin, even short man was silently staring at the light screen, paying attention to the values displayed on the instrument. This skinny man was wearing a round hat commonly seen in the L galaxy. It completely covered his messy short hair. Other than that, he looked very ordinary. There was nothing unusual about him. There were very few people from the Imperial Intelligence Agency on this pirate ship, so few that Muen found it strange. Apart from His Highness, who was disguised as an ordinary member, there was also a middle-aged man who usually hid in his room and read a book. In the end, Muen couldn't help but glance at the skinny man. Looking over his shoulder, he could clearly see the gradually forming star belt outside the window. After passing through that star belt, there would be a large area of low-density space, and then, it would be the cosmic gate leading to the Federation. The pirate ship would leave the Empire and enter the Federation in a few days. Muen's right hand subconsciously pulled out a few tufts of hair on his collar. He looked at the skinny man with a pale face. He couldn't understand what kind of reason could make this incomparably noble highness, who was more important to the Empire than all the fallen galaxies combined, take the risk to enter the Federation. After losing his courage on planet Emohua, Muen no longer dared to resist. He could only think in vain and in pain. He couldn't understand. Even if His Highness was the most powerful and glorious existence in the universe after Li Pifu's death, what could she do in the face of the Federation, which was more powerful than the Empire? Huai Chaosher finished cleaning up the redundant data of the life support system. She raised her head and calmly looked at the stars outside the window. Looking at the faintly visible spatial gate in the distance, she slowly raised her right hand and tidied up a strand of purple hair under the brim of her hat. She had once been to the Federation and witnessed the explosion of the ancient bell. Then she met a very interesting and hateful man from the Federation. Then she brushed past him and missed him. After receiving the news that the man was preparing to marry his half-sister, whom he had never met before, Huai Chaosher immediately activated the plan that the Intelligence Bureau had been preparing for a long time to infiltrate the Federation. She didn't hesitate to hide it from planet Tianjing and was indifferent to the terrifying dangers that might exist, as well as the anger of her father, because she didn't want to make mistakes again and again. Sulu lay on the bed with his hands behind his head. He looked at the wall that seemed like it could drip water at any time and said, "I didn't ask you to help me kill people. Whether it was the crack below the court or the full view of the court, they were all provided by you. Therefore, I don't think that your core program will have more intense conflicts than before. Naturally, you won't go crazy." After a moment of silence, the Federal Central Computer said, "But you always use your own death to threaten me to help you. For example, on the lawn, you shouted to the sky that you were going to die. What can I do?" During the battles over the past few days, Sulu had clearly noticed that under what circumstances, the old man would temporarily adjust his authority or core program's priority level. When he was killing people easily, the old man would usually remain silent. Only when he was in a desperate situation or when he was escaping after a battle, would he appear in his mind again. Sulu began to consciously put himself in desperate situations where he was on the verge of death. For example, during the battle outside the court, he directly charged into the encirclement of the Iron 7th Division's T Company, instead of choosing a seemingly safer, but actually more dangerous, method. In fact, the Federal Central Computer was very clear about his strategy, but because of the damned backdoor program left by the 5-man team, he could only helplessly and passively cooperate. Of course, perhaps helplessness was just to deceive himself, so that the pain caused by the core program's struggle wouldn't be so deep. "Can you help me? You have to know that I'm fighting against the entire Federation. Who has ever done this before? The old man of the Lee family only fought fiercely against the Empire. Uncle is used to changing places after every shot. If you don't help me, I'll definitely be dead." Sulu comforted it, then took out a 37 brand cigarette from somewhere and smoked happily. The ventilation system not far from here could make the residual smoke fade to the extent that the relevant equipment couldn't track it in a few minutes. "I violated the first and second core laws. This is very scary." The Federal Central Computer's voice was very calm, but Sulu felt like the despair and regret of a teenager who smashed the window of his teacher's house, only to be seen by the principal, and the principal was his strict father. He narrowed his eyes and held the cigarette in his mouth. After a moment of silence, he said, "I didn't kill anyone with your direct help. You know very well that none of the soldiers outside the court died. Should I say thank you for your understanding?" The old thing said mockingly, and then its mood suddenly sank. "The court told me not to hurt people and not to stand by and watch people get hurt. I should obey the order corresponding to the level of authority, but I can't violate the previous rule. After all, those soldiers were hurt by you. What about the people who were hurt by them?" Sulu narrowed his eyes, looked at the faint smoke in the darkness and said softly, "Did you stand by and watch?" The old thing fell silent and then chose another topic. "According to my calculations, you chose to shoot the soldier's shoulder holding the gun, not only because you helped me reduce the conflict between the core programs. At that time, the situation was critical and you had 4 bullet points on you. My question is, if you chose to eliminate the enemy instead of killing them, you could reduce the number of bullet points by 2. The order of the question was a bit messy, but Sulu heard it very clearly. He took the cigarette from his mouth, gently rubbed the inferior carbon filter unique to 37 brand cigarettes, and explained in a low voice, "There are many things I don't understand, but at least I understand one thing. I don't have the qualifications to occupy the moral high ground to demand from others, so I can only satisfy my own moral values. No, I can't even talk about moral values. Tonight we won't talk about morality, only peace of mind. You know that I'm a selfish person. This battle is just for simple revenge. If you want peace of mind and satisfaction, then it's best that the people who have nothing to do with this don't die." Sulu crushed the cigarette on the wet wall and then put it into a tank of dirty water. He got up and began to organize his equipment, saying, "Of course, those who deserve to die must die." According to the old guy, Schiller was a pseudonym. It was the bad taste of someone in the 5-person team back then, and it seemed to be related to the confidentiality of information before the Great Catastrophe. However, for the people of the Federation and a certain neurotic researcher in the Empire, Schiller was without a doubt the most incredible monument in the history of literature. Countless profound meanings were found in the vast works he left behind, and some of the classic sentences in them had already become Federation proverbs. Sulu had a deep memory of a sentence that appeared many times in Schiller's works. It was a sentence that was related to the production of war drums and morale. Since the battle was fought, the morale was high. If the battle was repeated, it was very likely that the spirit would be exhausted and the battle would be lost. Yesterday he killed Colonel Lake in the twilight, and this morning, Councilman Jean Chioda died. The needle of time had just turned a circle. He did not want to leave too much time for the big shots of the Federation government to be shocked. He was ready to eliminate the third target that he had planned. Councilman Paulson did not know that he was someone's third target. He had been receiving treatment in the hospital for the past few days after receiving a serious gunshot wound on Parliament Hill. He had transformed from a senior director of Xinjiao Investment Company to the deputy minister of finance of the former government. After becoming a councilman, he did not hesitate to break away from the control of that detestable old man and stood in the shadow behind Mr. President. It had to be admitted that this councilman had political acumen and courage that ordinary people could not reach. What supported these were his incomparable fanatical pursuit of power. Although his gunshot wound had mostly healed, Councilman Paulson was not in a hurry to return to Parliament Hill to enjoy the taste of power that belonged to him. Every time he thought of the handsome man who held the Magna Carta and read out the arrest rights of citizens, he would feel cold all over and began to fear Parliament Hill. However, there had been a lot of bad news in the past few days. The sudden increase of security in the hospital also made him feel some kind of ominous omen. He decided not to waste any more time in the hospital. He had to leave tomorrow. On the night when the councilman made this difficult decision, the sturdy door of the luxurious ward was directly blasted open by a huge force. Debris flew in all directions, cutting the TV screen and flowers into pieces that were unbearable to look at. Councilman Paulson's pupils contracted. He stared at the man who broke into the ward and was covered in blood. He stared at the face under the shadow of the hat. He wanted to ask who the other party was, but he desperately recognized who it was. Blood dripped from his sleeves to the ground. He looked at the councilman on the bed and asked with a smile, "Paulson?" Perhaps it was the smile and neat white teeth that gave people a very reliable feeling. Councilman Paulson subconsciously nodded. He raised his bleeding right hand and pulled the warm trigger, opening a delicate bloody hole between the councilman's eyebrows. That day in Magna Carta Square, Shi Qinghai called and said that he had shot Paulson twice. Tonight Sulu would be the third and last shot. Chapter 792. At least 3 bullets hit his body outside the bulletproof vest. Although the bleeding rate of the wounds slowed down a lot under the pressure of the force, the shrapnel inside was constantly eating away at his life force. In such a dangerous situation, the Federal Central Computer didn't need Sulu to shout to the night sky that he was going to die. Instead, it quickly provided all the information it could provide. Countless complex light grids clearly appeared in his left eye. Densely packed simulated human bodies with citizen numbers were moving quickly in these grids, quickly rushing to their positions. Because there were too many people, the citizen numbers hanging above their heads were even squeezed until only a few very short numbers were left. In the third operation, Sulu finally encountered unprecedented difficulties. As soon as he entered the hospital, he was fiercely attacked. It could be said that he had fallen into a trap or an ambush. However, to be more precise, it was actually just the powerful organizations of the Federation government. After his 2 successful assassinations in a row, they angrily and almost crazily mobilized all the power of the huge political machine. Relying on a terrifying amount of resources, they set up a net to capture and kill all the possible targets he could kill. And his luck was very bad. The department called Small Eyes, after a torturous night of calculations, almost risked their lives to place 2 of their subordinate special forces around the hospital. In the fierce battle downstairs, Sulu encountered one of these forces. This combat force was very strong. They seemed to be able to grasp the way the Federal Central Computer helped Sulu. At least they could use some of the preset programs to silently hide themselves as ordinary points of light in the eyes of the old thing. Once they found traces of Sulu, they would become abnormally terrifying killing machines. They were indeed killing machines. Even if Sulu was facing these elite soldiers whose physical reaction speed and close combat strength were far beyond ordinary standards, he still felt very strained. The other party had a strong smell that he was somewhat familiar with. In the fierce battle, he was almost trapped to death by the other party. In the end, at the risk of his body being shot several times, he forcefully slid out of the corridor and knocked down 6 people in an instant. Then he opened the elevator passage and climbed the sturdy suspension cable to temporarily escape danger. The moment he forcefully slid out of the corridor, 6 more flowers bloomed on the outer layer of the hard bulletproof vest on his body. His legs and right shoulder were shot 4 times in a row. The old thing issued a strong warning. More and more points of light were converging from various streets to the hospital in his left eye. However, Sulu only thought silently for less than half a second before he abandoned the idea of temporarily leaving. He directly climbed up the suspension cable between the elevator and burst out the terrifying power in his body again. He suddenly attacked the ward and ended the life of Senator Paulson. The points of light became denser and denser, like a swarm of bees gathering under the sun, giving people a numbing feeling of fear. Through his left eye, Sulu could clearly see that the 2 closest points of light at the end of the corridor outside the ward were clearly turning into accurate simulated human figures. They should be the troops that had fought fiercely downstairs just now. However, those powerful soldiers did not immediately launch an attack. Instead, they calmly blocked the corridor with heavy firepower and waited for more reinforcements to arrive. He quickly walked to the bed, picked up the dead Senator Paulson without any hesitation and threw him out of the window. The window shattered. The senator's body fell less than half a meter, and there were several terrifying bloody holes on his body. Then the unique sound of the armor-piercing bullets of the 21-26 sniper rifle rang out. The ace sniper of the troops was already in position. A soft click came from the distance. The military searchlights on the buildings across the street were turned on, illuminating the side of the hospital building facing the street as bright as noon. The inside of the hospital was completely controlled by the elite troops. Even if he killed his way down floor by floor, there was no way he could kill all the people that were continuously pouring in. The searchlights on the side of the street and who knew how many 2126 sniper rifles completed a perfect blockade, directly cutting off any possibility of him using his powerful strength and steel-like body to climb the wall and leave. Suli's eyes narrowed. It was only at this moment that he finally felt the horror of the huge machine known as the Federation. In such a short time, the other party had made such a strong response and forced him into a desperate situation. There was no fear, no panic. He dared to kill when he was 12 years old. He had seen countless deaths on the front line. He had experienced more difficult situations in his life. At that moment it was as if this was just one more time. He took the X9 on his shoulder, aimed the black barrel of the gun at the wall between the 2 windows in the ward and pulled the trigger. The powerful shrapnel roared and cut an arched circle in the hard composite wall. The last rain of bullets fiercely bombarded the base of the wall. The Federation troops outside the ward were ready and began to attack forcefully. Amidst the rapid footsteps and the sound of the bullets, Sulu crashed into the wall without hesitation. Under the searchlights, it was incomparably bright and white, as if it was a giant light screen that was locked into a white screen because of piracy. Everything on the screen was so clear, especially in the photoelectric sights of the snipers. Even the tracks of a reptile running at high speed were so obvious. With a loud boom, the wall outside the 27th floor suddenly exploded with countless pieces of debris, pouring out onto the street. Almost at the same time, a person crashed through the wall and resolutely fell down as if he was jumping off a cliff. The snipers aimed at the 2 wide floor-to-ceiling windows according to the requirements of the military manual and tactical discipline. Although they didn't believe that someone would be crazy enough to climb down from the 27th floor, because the target in the ward was Colonel Sulu, they had no choice but to believe. It was also because they were extremely vigilant of Suli's ability that they focused all of their attention on the windows. They wanted to hit the target in one shot and couldn't give the other party any chance. Excessive focus and mental tension could help ace snipers make faster shooting responses than usual, but it also made them slower than usual when changing targets. This was because they didn't expect Suli's judgment of the situation on the battlefield to be so fast and strange. It was as if he had chosen the path to break through the building as soon as the searchlights were turned on. He didn't break through the windows but forcibly broke through the solid wall. Bang bang. The crisp and shrill sound of a sniper bullet suddenly rang out, and a few clouds of terrifying smoke and dust burst out on the bright white hospital building facing the street. However, the bullet didn't hit the figure that was falling at high speed. The blood beads on his left sleeve were blown away by the night wind from his wrist. From the corner of his eye, it looked like he was flying strangely toward the sky. Su Li's face was slightly pale, but his narrowed eyes were unusually bright. He felt the wind blowing against his neck and received the altitude and speed report from the old man at an incredible speed. Whoosh! He opened his arms and legs. The triangular parachute adjustment cloth connected between his sleeves and his body played a very important role in this moment. It instantly carried a lot of air buoyancy and reduced his speed to a level where he could react in time. The stiletto on his left leg shot out like lightning and then pierced into the solid composite wall. Because of the material, there were no sparks. There was only a teeth-numbing grinding sound and a pungent burnt smell that quickly spread in the night sky. The sharp stiletto cut deeper and deeper into the outer wall, cutting through a whole floor's distance. Finally, it succeeded in slowing down Su Li's falling speed by a little. Bang! The most powerful sniper in the surrounding buildings took the initiative to shoot the second bullet. However, because the escape method Su Li chose was too shocking, and the change in speed was too fast and too steep, the sniper's shot was not calibrated. The terrifying bullet brushed past Su Li's right shoulder and deeply blasted into the hospital's outer wall. After the first shot, there was a second shot. Su Li, who was using the stiletto and the terrifying strength of his muscles to forcibly slow down his falling speed, had no way to avoid the upcoming chain of sniper shots. Unless he chose to let go of the handle of the stiletto and once again accelerated beyond the sniper's expectations. However, his body was about the 10th floor at this moment. The ground in the night was set against the unusually bright walls of the building. It was as unreachable as an abyss, and he was falling at a rapid speed. If he let go of the stiletto and jumped down like this, even the former military godly Pifu would not have any luck. In this seemingly desperate situation, Su Li made a very simple decision. He let go of the stiletto handle in his hand and accelerated his falling speed again. He narrowly avoided another sniper bullet. His body twisted in an extremely strange way in the air. His right arm bent and stretched back beyond the limit of human imagination and grabbed the windowsill heavily. There was a pot of bright yellow autumn chrysanthemums on the windowsill. At this moment, under the illumination of the searchlights, it was deathly white and trembling. The moment the palm made contact with the windowsill, countless cracks appeared on the hard composite material, and a loud crash sounded. Su Li's body used this terrifying force to heavily stop. Then he drew a beautiful arc in the air. With a speed that was almost invisible to the naked eye, he fell another 2 meters. His feet kicked open the tempered glass of the lower floor and disappeared. The shrill sound of the sniper rifle shooting could not be heard again. Above the street there was clearly the sound of sirens, but at this moment, it felt so quiet as if there was a deathly stillness. In the deep darkness of the night, the street facing the hospital building was as bright as day. In the eyes of those snipers, Su Li crashed through the wall, jumped down, and valiantly accelerated and decelerated several times. Then he entered the hospital building again and disappeared under the searchlights. It was just a matter of the blink of an eye. The outer wall of the hospital building seemed to have become a white stage, and that person was under the spotlight, displaying to the entire Federation an unbelievable scene that represented fearlessness and power. Chapter 793. Through the oldest lines that could only be found in history museums and elementary school science and technology groups, the signals traveled from all directions of the capital to the interior of the building painted with the red-eye pattern, turning into countless continuous and deafening ringtones. 20 young and beautiful operators transferred by the Federation Communications Agency from various subsidiaries quickly listened to the summary of information from all sides, then handwritten on expensive fiber paper, and sent it up to the second floor by the professional courier waiting at the door at the fastest speed. The Small Eyes department responsible for the operation to kill Su Li had the command of most of the operations forces in the capital special district at the moment. The information from the hospital building was first summarized and calculated by them, and then the information was passed to the highest level within the government. From these details, it was clear that the Federation government had indeed made a lot of targeted arrangements in order to eliminate Su Li. A few minutes later, in the underground command hall of the president's official residence, a lieutenant colonel with a microphone turned to the president, who was handling the daily affairs of the Federation at the table, and said, "Su Li is seriously injured." The ink pen in President Pabre's hand paused slightly, and he looked up calmly and said, "That's good news. What's the plan for the next step?" "He has already escaped the hospital building." The lieutenant colonel quickly reported to the president and several big shots in the room. Small Eyes is calculating and reasoning about the possible direction he could have escaped. President Pabre did not have any reaction, and his eyes were slightly lowered as he continued to quickly review the electronic documents in front of him. After the incident in the hospital building, the president's official residence was informed of the news immediately. Under the strong request of the Special Task Force, he was moved from the surface to the heavily guarded underground, but these government affairs that required his attention had to continue to be handled. The president did not like Senator Paulson, and the death of this political opportunist without a firm will did not have any psychological impact on him. In fact, when the Small Eyes department targeted the hospital building, it was obvious that the safety of the senator was not the top priority. It was just that no one expected that Sulu would be able to successfully escape after they had forced him into a desperate situation. Although he is heavily injured, he will not choose to give up or run away. The digital pen in the president's hand froze again. He slowly raised his head and looked at the lieutenant colonel and the silent cabinet members around the table. His voice was low and powerful. With Sulu's personality, he won't stop fighting as long as he doesn't die. A moment later, a complicated smile appeared on that dark face. President Pabre said with a faint self-deprecating tone, "We are people with similar personalities. If I had his ability, perhaps I would do the same." The command office deep underground could withstand the direct attack of a battleship's main cannon, so one could only imagine how deep it was. The pressure of the surrounding crust seemed to seep out from behind the walls at this moment, causing the density of the air to suddenly increase, making it difficult for people to breathe. Furthermore, the people in the room did not know how to respond to Mr. President's exclamation, so it was dead silent. Only the ventilation equipment at the end of the passage and the people's lungs kept emitting low muffled sounds. Sulu now needs a relatively quiet and safe space to carry out the initial treatment. At the very least, he needs to stop the bleeding. Just as Mr. President has judged, he will not leave the capital, so he can only return to the underground sewers. General Lee Jae-do broke the dead silence in the room. He looked at the people with a smile and said, "After these days of technical preparation and remote sensing scanning, we have already grasped the entrances to the underground sewers within 15 kilometers of the hospital. One of the two special forces under the command of Small Eyes has successfully injured Sulu in the hospital building, and the other is now waiting for him underground." After the government cabinet members in the room heard Lee Jae-do's words, their expressions immediately relaxed. They believed that since the leader of the federal military had made such ample preparations, he would definitely not let Sulu escape again. President Pabre's broad palm tightly held the electronic ink pen. He was not as relaxed and happy as the others. His two straight eyebrows, darker than his dark skin, slightly furrowed. Lee Jae-do knew where the president's real concern was. He turned around, lowered his head and whispered in his ear, "There will be a result soon. Please rest assured." The left side of his chest was in pain. There were signs of 2 cracked ribs. This was especially true for the cracked ribs he had been hit in the military court yesterday afternoon. Because of the fierce battle, there was an even more serious problem. The elite troops of the Federation in the hospital building were indeed powerful. From the bullet points that were concentrated on the left side of his chest, it was clear that the special forces were strong. Under the cover of the night, Sulu's half-squatted body moved quickly toward the southwest corner of the capital, brushing against the shadows of the buildings. In the follow-up battle after rushing out of the hospital building, 2 more pieces of shrapnel shot into the muscles outside the bulletproof vest. Fortunately, they did not damage the periosteum. The most serious injury was on his wrist. At that time he was falling at a high speed under the daylight created by the searchlights. In order to forcibly reverse the speed, his palm grabbed onto the windowsill where Chiyoju was placed. For an instant he endured an extremely huge impact. Even with his strong and special muscle double fiber structure, a lot of it was torn. Before the injury healed, he would not be able to exert any strength. The small blue device in his military backpack had been working the entire time. Occasionally, the Federal Central Computer would give him directions in extremely dangerous situations. Just like that, he went all the way west, then turned south in an alley and came to the side of an abandoned road. Although it was an abandoned road, it was still very lively at night. Countless expensive sports cars and modified special vehicles were roaring around the shabby little house at the foot of the hill. There were no street lights here, but the headlights were enough to illuminate the place as if it was daytime, just like the searchlights outside the hospital building. Gorgeous women were wearing very little clothes, showing their exaggerated curves to their heart's content, regardless of the cold autumn wind, releasing the excitement brought by alcohol and soft drugs. Countless men and women were hugging each other, roaring and screaming excitedly. A few years ago Li Xiaotong brought Sulu here. This was the most famous black car racing venue in the Federation. It was started by Lin Banshan's strong means and later on, it changed hands many times, but its fame and scale continued to this day. Every night, people would come here to seek the thrill of speed and even the excitement of life and death, as if they did not live in the real world. In their eyes there was no battle with the Empire, no political conspiracy about the ancient clock ship, only the women, the speed of drugs and the infinite pleasure brought by death. Sulu squatted in the dark grass of the hillside, silently squinting at the bizarre scene. The previous race had just ended. The driver who had won first place had won a large sum of money and a few beautiful women with flirtatious eyes. The driver who had won second place had gotten nothing. He had walked up the hill alone and was beaten up by some people. He had fallen miserably in the yellow mud. The expensive silver Phantom sports car that attracted the most attention of the audience quietly left like a ghost after its owner's anger calmed down a little. Only a middle-aged man in a black suit, standing under the night sky like an iron spear, still stayed on the hill. Sulu stood up from the grass, looking at the departing silver Phantom sports car with a smile, wondering if the guy in the car who always dressed himself up as a winter plum, was looking at him with a complicated expression through the window at this time. Walking behind the middle-aged man in a black suit, before Sulu had time to speak, the man had already noticed his arrival and said in a low voice, "It seems that your injury is really serious. Those Special Forces soldiers should have trained in the Philadelphia Body Training Hall." Sulu kept a distance of 2 meters from the man. The middle-aged man's black suit was very straight, like the cloth wrapped around a hard iron spear. He put down the black leather case in his hand, said "Take care," and then left the dark hillside. "Sorry to trouble you, Brother Zeng." Sulu picked up the heavy black leather case and walked down the hill in another direction. Sulu covered his head with the hood of his windbreaker, walked to a seemingly ordinary gray car, knocked on the window and said to the man with a swollen nose and swollen face, "Can you take me to a place?" The man who was wiping his nose frowned and looked at him, but he couldn't see his face clearly. After a moment of silence he said, "I never accept jobs that are too dangerous." Suli's voice came out from under the shadow of the hood. "I heard that you are in need of money recently. After losing that round you owe a big shot a lot of money. If you don't pay it back by tomorrow, you and your family will be in great danger." The man's eyes flashed with a strong sense of vigilance, staring at Sulu outside the window and said coldly, "How do you know this?" "You don't need to care about this, you just need to answer if you want to do it or not," answered Sulu. "Do you know how much I owe?" 1 million. The man frowned and asked. Sulu picked up the heavy black leather case in his hand and shook it outside the window. The man was silent for a long time, one hand holding the steering wheel tightly, the other holding the old-fashioned mechanical gear, as if he could roar and leave at any time, but in the end, a trace of despair flashed across his face. He opened the door and said self-deprecatingly, "It seems that I have to gamble with my life for a job that is worth so much money." Sulu opened the door and sat in the back. He took a breath, checked the equipment in his windbreaker, and confirmed that there was no problem with his backpack. He said calmly to the man in front of him, "I don't think I need to gamble with my life. I just want to go somewhere, but I can't be stopped by the military police." The man was slightly stunned, but then he smiled happily and said, "It seems that your information is very accurate. I may not drive the fastest, but I have never been stopped." The seemingly normal gray car roared away from the abandoned road that was still bustling with activity and quickly disappeared into the night. The sound of the engine seemed to have become much softer as the surrounding environment changed. The dark night outside the window did not pose too much of a hindrance to Suli's vision. He confirmed that he had never been to this road that was hidden between the streets and the market. After traveling silently for a while in the city, the scenery outside the window gradually became more spacious. Between the shorter and shorter buildings, she could faintly see the corridors of fields and dense forests. They should have reached the suburbs. However, Sulu had no idea how the man in the front row did it. He drove all the way without being discovered by the military police who set up checkpoints. All the lights were turned off and the surroundings were dark. The gray car sped through the fields in the suburbs like a ghost. Sulu knew how he could see the road clearly. In fact, if not for the precise satellite image just sent by the Federal Central Computer, he wouldn't have been able to discover such a hidden road in the fields and forests. If he didn't know where he was, then he believed that the Federation government wouldn't know where he was either. Suli's nerves, which had been tense for a long time, finally relaxed a little. 60% of his back was comfortably leaning against the seat, but he still maintained the mobility that could jump out of the car at any time or kill the man in front of him. This was the road arranged by Li Xiaotong. With the ability of the Iron Schemer, it wasn't difficult to make a famous night racer suffer so much that he was willing to do anything for $1 million. Li Xiaotong didn't meet with Sulu, and he didn't even get out of the expensive silver ghost. He only asked Brother Xing to leave him a whole box of cash. He also didn't ask where Sulu was going after leaving the capital. With regards to these things, the more one knew, the less safe it was, and the less safe it was for Sulu. It was said that money was the coldest and most powerful thing in the world. But Suli's right hand, which was placed on the black leather case, could clearly feel the warmth coming from inside. "We're here. This is the place you specified." The man walked out of the gray car, pulled out a tissue and stuffed his bleeding nostrils. He looked down at the shielding composite net in front of him, and couldn't help but have a strong question. Why did the man he never had the chance to see clearly come here? There was nothing on the other side of the shielding net. Only a long and endless hard railroad track lying quietly. Sulu walked out of the car, leaving the black leather case in the back. He narrowed his eyes at the shielding net in front of him, checked his backpack and equipment again, and flipped over with one hand. The man looked at him curiously and then suddenly remembered something. He quickly got into the back of the car and opened the black leather case. After seeing the neat and old $2 million in cash in the case, he couldn't control the surprise and shock in his heart. He subconsciously raised his head and looked at Sulu, who was standing silently on the side of the railroad track. After an unknown amount of time, the quiet railroad track began to tremble, and the whistling of the wind began to oppressively sound. Boom, 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 boom. The high-speed train from the capital to Hong Kong roared and rolled over the railroad track at high speed. The composite shielding net next to the railroad track was shaking, but Sulu, who was standing on the net, still had his head down and didn't have the slightest expression. When the high-speed train passed by him, he began to run, like a poor young man who was anxious to see his long-distance lover but didn't board the train. In front of them was the first big turn after the Beijing-Hong Kong high-speed train left the capital. The train began to slow down in the darkness ahead, but the figure chasing the train in the darkness became faster and faster. The man who stayed in the same place stared over there, faintly seeing the mysterious passenger climb onto the high-speed train. He couldn't help but open his mouth wide and couldn't close it for a long time. Chapter 794. Passion and hot-bloodedness collided. When the youngest lieutenant general of the Galactic Alliance in his previous life arrived on this continent where martial arts were respected, he brought with him an enormous amount of martial arts memories. He was destined to bring unprecedented changes to this continent. Passion, friendship, love, and the most brilliant hot-blooded path of cultivation. Book ID 1798557. Author Zhang Danian. Running non-stop on the long train track, the cool autumn night wind whistled against his face. Although the train ahead had already slowed down, the air flowing out of the carriage at high speed made the night wind even more devastating and unpredictable. With a bang, Sulu used his uninjured hand to valiantly grab a protrusion. The heat in his body erupted like a star exploding. In an instant he climbed up, adjusted his posture in the strong wind, and fell heavily onto the top of the carriage. However, he cleverly used the strong wind on the top of the carriage to slow down his speed, making only a slight sound. He took out a military strap from his backpack, passed it through the maintenance hole on the top of the high-speed train, and then wrapped it tightly around his waist. After repeating this 3 times, his body that was dangerously sliding on the smooth top of the carriage was finally fixed. Suli's nerves suddenly relaxed and his muscles relaxed as he lay flat. He squeezed out a sigh from his burning lungs, and then was quickly blown away without a trace by the night wind whistling from the bottom of his feet. If his body was in perfect condition, it wouldn't be difficult for Sulu to complete the action of climbing the high-speed train to fix his body. However, his injuries were very serious, especially since he had lost a lot of blood and hadn't been able to replenish it. Whether it was his spirit or his physical strength, they were both at their lowest point. Fortunately, he had come up and was about to leave. Contrary to the logical calculations and intuition of President Pabre and all the powerful organizations of the Federation government, he silently lay flat on the top of the whistling and cold high-speed train on this autumn night, enduring the torment of his gunshot wound, and left the capital special district for the largest city in the Federation. The Trinity Association had become an extremely powerful organization in the small pub on the street. Shi Qinghai had killed Byron and Mace in the Parliament Hill, and Senator Paulson, who had been shot by Sulu, wasn't a member of the association at all. The other important member of the association, General Hu Zhu, was currently recuperating in the garrison area of Harbor City. He took the high-speed train to Harbor City just to kill people. The metropolis in front of them that looked like a deformed giant beast waking up in the morning fog was the largest and most prosperous port city in the Federation. Sulu stood next to the highway and looked over there. Feeling the slight warmth from the soles of his shoes, he could not help but shake his head with a bitter smile. As expected of the most luxurious place in the entire capital ring. Autumn had just arrived and the Municipal Road Management Department had already started to speed up the heating equipment under the cement layer, not caring about the redundant consumption at all. Sulu was no stranger to this city, which was far larger than the capital. Back when he was developing the MX Mecha at the Nutshell Engineering Department, he would take the high-speed rail from the capital to Hong Kong every weekend. He had passed by this city countless times, but strangely he could not find any sense of familiarity or closeness. About 100 kilometers away from Hong Kong, he took the opportunity when the high-speed train was decelerating through the filtering channel to jump off. It was not that he did not think of slamming on the brakes like Lin Banshan and Zhang Xiaohua did in the past, but that would appear too arrogant. He was here to kill people, so he naturally needed to be more low-key than low-key. Standing by the side of the road, Sulu stretched out his right hand and made a hitchhiking gesture. Because there weren't many cars in the morning, a kind-hearted female driver stopped beside him after more than 10 minutes. In the following conversation, the female driver, who was already over 40 years old, frankly admitted that it was purely because she couldn't bear to hurt Su Li's smile under the shadow of the hat, so she stepped on the brakes. 4 hours later, a young man wearing a hooded sports coat and carrying a heavy backpack walked out of the garden-style sanatorium in the garrison area of Port City. Because the brim of the hood was too low, no one noticed that his face was unusually pale. He bought a phone that was neither cheap nor expensive from the military service center opposite the sanatorium. The young man quickly and inconspicuously turned into a side alley. For some reason his legs were trembling violently. The end of the alley was still an alley. The slightly polluted air was particularly difficult to breathe under the midday sun. Sulu panted rapidly as he walked into the shadows, looking for the nearest sewer system valve cover. He could no longer control the ruptured wound. Blood quickly seeped out along his arm and dripped down from his sleeve. His legs were the same. Who knew how many gunshot wounds began to bleed after he lost control of his muscles? Every step he took toward the end of the alley left a clear blood footprint on the ground. It was not until his figure disappeared into the shadows and the blood stopped dripping in front of a slowly rotating underground sewer door that an extremely sharp alarm suddenly rang out in the Port City Garrison Recuperation Center, mixed with the unique screams of a woman. The interior of the sanatorium occupied the second floor of the building with the best view. From the balcony one could clearly see the gorgeous garden below. In Hong Kong City, where air pollution and economic power were both the best in the Federation, this huge garden undoubtedly represented absolute power and luxury. General Hu Zhu, who had just been relieved of his position as the deputy commander of the 2nd Military Region and was preparing to receive more important orders from the president, loved this garden the most while he was recuperating in Hong Kong City. The general had been in the military for many years. He was no longer the smart and weak military officer of the Trinity Alliance. The blazing midday sun never disturbed him as he admired the elegance of the garden on the balcony. In fact, he felt that such a gorgeous garden needed the most beautiful sunlight to set off its brilliance. just like how he, under the brilliance of the president and the president, would definitely blossom into the most dazzling brilliance in his life in the future. This afternoon, a young, beautiful and gentle waitress came into the room with a smile on her face. Just as she was about to bring the exquisite food and drinks to the balcony, she found that the general had fallen asleep, which was very rare. Amidst the beautiful sunlight and the garden, General Hu Zhu seemed to be sleeping soundly. His eyes were extremely wide open, filled with anger and shock. The delicate bloody hole left by the sharp military spike on his throat had completely destroyed his life. Just before he was about to blossom into the most beautiful light, the underground sewer of Hong Kong City was filled with a stench that was even worse than that of the capital's special district. However, Su Lu, who was walking slowly in the darkness, didn't seem to smell it at all. When he passed by a corner with good signal, he picked up the phone and dialed the number of a certain girl again. Almost immediately after, the deep and charming voice of the president sounded from the other side of the phone. Until this moment, Su Lu still felt that this voice was indeed convincing. After a moment of silence with mixed emotions, he said in a low voice, "Byron is dead, Matt is dead, Lake is dead, Paulson is dead, and just now General Hu Zhu is also dead. Mr. President, guess who will be the next one?" Chapter 795. Mr. President, we just received the news. The staff of the official residence pushed open the door and entered. Looking at President Pabre on the balcony in the morning light with a shocked face, he quickly said, "General Hu Zhu was assassinated in the Harbor City Garrison Sanatorium and has died. According to the speculation, it should be Su. Can you slow down your information collection a little bit?" President Pabre roared and stopped his subordinate's report. His broad shoulders trembled violently because of anger. He suddenly threw the phone in his hand to the wall. The phone broke into 3 pieces, revealing the miserable pipeline components inside. The officials in the Oval Office stood up with complicated expressions. The sound outside the door suddenly stopped, and the entire official residence was shrouded in silence. No one had ever seen the president so furious. Even when Vice President Pabre was killed in Parliament Hill a few months ago, President Pabre's face was only filled with grief, but there was still firmness and confidence in that intense grief. He was definitely not as furious as he was at this moment. The most loyal subordinates and the most excellent companions were dying one after another. They left one after another in Su Li's cold-blooded terrorist attack. President Pabre could ignore that Senator Paulson became a pile of meat under the hospital building, but he couldn't bear the heavy psychological blow that Hu Zhu's death brought to him. General Hu Zhu was also a member of the tavern back then. In the grand historical mission conceived by the most outstanding minds of the Federation, the general played a very important role and took on more difficult tasks. He was the best candidate in President Pabre's mind to be the commander-in-chief of the frontline troops of the Federation. However, who would have thought that he would quietly die in Harbor City like this? Li Jiedu had been dealing with very critical issues in the Bureau of Proclamation for the past few days. No one in the official residence could bear the president's extremely rare angry roar. Even Director Breen didn't dare to come forward to comfort him. His 2 thick and powerful hands supported his thick and tired body on the table. His chest heaved up and down quickly. After a while, President Pabre finally calmed down with his strong willpower and self-discipline. With an unstoppable determination in his deep voice, he ordered, "Tell all troops to get ready. I want to visit Harbor City immediately." The staff in the office were collectively shocked. Knowing that the horrible Colonel Su Lu was in Harbor City, Mr. President insisted on going there in person, which was really incredible. Director Breen silently looked at the president's back. He understood that the president didn't want Su Lu to have the initiative to choose the battlefield. "I don't need to guess who you'll kill next. I'll silently and coldly wait for you to kill me or wait for you to kill me." This was not the choice of a calm politician, but this was the fundamental reason why Director Breen and other Federation geniuses like Du Xiaoqing chose to follow President Pabre. He quickly walked to the encrypted phone and notified the small-eyed troops, the Army Command Center, the Special Task Force and the Federation Investigation Bureau in order. When President Pabre made a strong decision in the morning light of the capital, it was a sunny day in Port City on the other side of the continent. However, the dark and smelly underground sewer was cold and gloomy. Su Lu, whose clothes were full of blood stains, was holding onto the wet wall and moving forward step by step with great difficulty. In less than 48 hours he had experienced many different but equally intense battles. The consumption of his mental and physical strength was negligible, but the constant loss of blood and the wounds that were being inflicted had already caused fatigue to fill his limbs and body like lead water, all the way to his brain. When he hitched a ride into Hong Kong, although he didn't look any different on the surface of his clothes, in fact he was already seriously injured. The miraculous healing speed he had in the past few years on the battlefield was useless in front of the terrible injuries he had accumulated in the past 2 days and 2 nights. People in this state of health needed medicine and surgery the most. Even if it was just a break of deep sleep, no one would choose to fight again with a seriously injured body. But Sulu chose to continue. Because what he needed most now was time. He was able to achieve such a result in the capital special district largely because he had caught the government off guard twice in a row after the military court. When the government was fully mobilized and broke into the hospital building to kill Senator Paulson, they paid a very heavy price. The second-level monitoring network of the Federation Investigation Bureau was a system with countless monitoring heads and human data capture programs as the core. Because it required a very complicated and massive amount of calculations, and it had to be done independently of the charter, they had to choose a certain focus. When everyone thought that Sulu was still under the capital special district, like an injured lion licking its wounds in the night, preparing for the next attack, he came to Harbor City and then attacked with a speed that was beyond the imagination of the other side. The price of his body was not small, but the result was very satisfactory. When the delicate bayonet pierced through the throat of General Hu Zhu, the heavily guarded Harbor City Guard District did not have any reaction. There was a big turning point in the underground sewer system in front of him. Endless dirty domestic wastewater flowed down at high speed, and endless waves hit the filter grid made of composite materials, making a low roar like thunder. The wet space was filled with a nauseating smell, and there were traces of mice and reptiles around, but there was no moss. This was the #1 temporary camp that Sulu chose. The heavy backpack on his shoulder fell to the ground, and his body fell weakly on the backpack almost at the same time, and he couldn't get up for a long time. In the late autumn of the Federation, the president's official residence suddenly announced that President Pabre was going to visit the Harbor City Industrial Park. At the same time, countless agents from all the powerful agencies of the government quietly entered this huge city, and the Harbor City Guard District increased the security level. For 3 consecutive nights, accompanied by hundreds of soldiers of the small-eyed combat force with solemn expressions, dozens of heavy trucks with multiple bearings slowly arrived one after another. The gigantic multi-axle trucks that could carry 700 tons of goods crushed the cement ground in front of the gate of a certain base in the garrison district into a horrible state. No one in the base dared to raise any objections, because the serial numbers of these multi-axle trucks were very clear, and they belonged to the Iron 7th Division, and they carried the Federation's most advanced MX mecha. From the most luxurious private hospitals of the rich and powerful to the dirtiest illegal clinics in the red light district, from the large chain medical stores to the adult stores that sold the common anti-inflammatory drug Betaxone on the roadside, they were all under strict surveillance. Countless people worked hard to make sure that someone couldn't get any medicine or medical treatment. The ordinary goods on the market didn't seem to be affected at all, but outside all the places that sold compressed nutrition bars, there were always some people with different tastes. They didn't expect to be able to stop someone from getting food. They just wanted to make it very difficult for that person to get food. The resources that the federal government could control were already extremely powerful combat forces. When they were fully mobilized, they instantly released an infinite amount of terrifying power. However, what was strange was that there was suddenly no news of the guy who had triggered all of this. The Federation's secondary surveillance network that was spread all over Harbor City couldn't find any trace of Sulu. For several days they couldn't find any trace of him. He seemed to have disappeared in the sea of people in Harbor City, or disappeared in the extremely complicated underground water system. The citizens of Harbor City smelled something strange. On the civilian network, there were already people who began to discuss the strange phenomenon in the city. There were even netizens who took pictures of as many as 400 black SUVs belonging to the Federation Investigation Bureau entering the city. Some people keenly noticed the pressure that the medical system was under recently. However, for people who lacked enough information to support them, they could only make intense and lively guesses or debate based on these appearances, but they couldn't touch on the truth of the matter. Even if some people thought of Colonel Sulu who had disappeared for a long time, they could only sigh with emotion. The Federation's official news media was still tirelessly reporting on the frontline battle. The fierce battle on planet Mo, and the victory of the new 17th Division that rushed to the front line to provide support. These news successfully attracted the attention of most Federation citizens. Apart from the war, the official news media would occasionally mention the presidential election that was about to begin. However, whether it was from public opinion polls or the great demonstration that shocked the Federation a while ago, it was very easy for people to come to the conclusion that President Pobre would definitely be re-elected. As a result, news of the presidential election had completely lost its previous appeal. Under the strict control of the Federation government, the execution in the military court, the death of Colonel Lake, the battle in the hospital building, and the fall of Representative Paulson were all things that no one knew about. As for the number 2 figure of Green Dragon Mountain, Representative Jean Chioda, who died on Parliament Hill, it was announced that he had passed away due to illness. The Federation government expressed shock and deep condolences. The anti-government forces and the Nanshui leader who didn't need Sulu to take the blame were very happy to accept this explanation. The news media controlled by the large families also strangely didn't raise any questions. There wasn't even a single newspaper that mentioned the gunshots in the hospital building. Right now, Sulu, who was hiding in Hong Kong's underground waterways, also didn't want to tell this news to all of the Federation citizens. The war on the other side of the universe was still fiercely continuing. The army needed a seemingly stable rear. No one wanted the Federation to fall into chaos. They only wanted to silently and cruelly kill each other in the shadows of the night, but they weren't willing to put on a show for the public to see. The government, Sulu, the 7 great families, and Green Dragon Mountain seemed to have formed a kind of laughable and somewhat sad tacit understanding. The operation that consumed a huge amount of government resources still continued on Hong Kong's surface. It looked like it would never end. The heavily injured Sulu was still silently waiting in the dark and stinking underground. It looked like he would never come out. In this strangely calm atmosphere, the people on the surface and underground were competing in patience. On a certain incomparably ordinary evening, an alarm sounded in a building in the distant Capital Special District. The Federation Investigation Bureau's secondary surveillance network discovered a suspicious target outside a certain pharmacy in Hong Kong's Shanbao district. The battle abruptly started and then quickly ended. There was a fresh blood stain in the underground waterway behind the street, and on the ground further away were cloth shopping bags that had been torn apart by shrapnel. Several bottles of medicine rolled around beside them. Chapter 796. Once the battle started, it would unfold one after another. In the remote streets of Harbor City, next to the misty lake in the city, gunshots would occasionally ring out. The gunfire would instantly light up the night sky, and then it would quietly end again. This was a battle between an individual and the Federation. If it weren't for the Federal Central Computer shining behind him, no matter how powerful Sulu was, he would only be crushed into countless pieces by the powerful government machine. Specifically, in the continuous silent battles this autumn, even with the help of the old man, he still encountered a lot of dangers. There were several times when he was almost successfully hunted down by the other party. The special department named Small Eyes efficiently commanded countless military police and gradually played a more and more powerful role in the battle. In the sometimes blue and sometimes gray sky, the autumn ground and the dark and damp underground, a large net with the skeleton of the sea of people and intensive surveillance had been laid out and began to gradually tighten. It was about to bind the seemingly powerful and invincible Sulu in the center of the net. A burst of violent coughing sounded in the dark underground passage. The sound squeezed out from the injured lung was forcefully suppressed, but it forcibly broke through the throat, vibrating the dry vocal cords and making a hoarse and unpleasant sound. With his back against the wet wall, Sulu spread his legs and sat on the ground tiredly and relaxedly. The modified H-14 in his arms was not so cold because it was wrapped with several layers of coarse cloth. The stiletto tied to his calf was clearly deformed. It should have been damaged in the fierce battle. His lips were unhealthily pale and dry. Because of the violent coughing, the 37 brand cigarette between his lips trembled up and down. Together with the sparks and ash, they danced in the dark space in front of his eyes like tiny fireflies. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the sewage flowing not far away in front of him. He smelled a strong stench and subconsciously frowned. He took the cigarette from his lips and touched a wet and sticky thing with his fingers. Only then did he know that the smell was the smell of blood. After many days of intense fighting and high-intensity escape, Su Li's old wounds showed no signs of healing. The government was crazily spending a huge amount of resources to control the supply of medicine in this city. In order to obtain medicine, he even added some very serious new wounds. Over the past few days, even the replenishment of food and energy had started to become difficult. As for the large amount of ammunition that had been consumed in the battle, apart from a few standard caliber bullets that they had fortunately found from the unconscious soldiers by the lakeside of Sorrowless Lake, they had not been able to replenish their ammunition. The so-called depletion of ammunition and food seemed to have turned into an incomparably miserable scene not far ahead. No matter how one looked at it, Sulu was now forced into a desperate situation. There were only two paths in front of him. He could either take the risk to break through the outposts on the outskirts of the city and move to a wider world, or he could take the risk to go to the surface and carry out the most violent assault in order to change the current situation. However, he did not choose either path. There was not the slightest trace of despair on his ordinary face. There was not even a sense of loss brought about by a defeat. He was still so calm and determined. Even when he was extremely exhausted and on the verge of mental and physical collapse, he was still in the mood to chat. According to the textbooks, because of the Great Catastrophe, all the information of the previous civilization can no longer be found. Therefore, people only know that there was once such a civilization, but they do not know what that civilization looked like. In fact, I have always been very curious. If humans were not born in S1, then where is their real home? Sulu wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and lightly beat his chest to relieve the intense pain in his lungs. He leaned against the wall and narrowed his eyes as he asked, "If everything was destroyed, then how did you survive? After these years of being together, I know that your ability is more amazing than what the people of the Federation think. Do you have any good stories to tell me about this?" The quiet and cold underground water channel was silent. After an unknown amount of time, the voice of the Federal Central Computer sounded. There was no emotional fluctuation in the voice, it was calm and cold. "The information before the catastrophe is top secret. Your level of authority is not high enough. In addition, according to the core instructions and the countless calculations I have repeated, even if you know more about the civilization before the catastrophe, it will not be of any help to the current human society. I just feel that I may die soon. Therefore, although I am only in my 20s, I suddenly feel that these endless underground water channels are full of the smell of vicissitudes. Therefore, I want to hear an old story with a strong sense of vicissitudes." Sulu smiled tiredly. He leaned against the wall and gently stroked the rough cloth of the sniper rifle from top to bottom. He said, "Although your life is incomparably long, I am the first person in your life that you can directly communicate with. Now that I may die at any time, you will once again fall into eternal loneliness. I suggest that you cherish the opportunity to talk to me." The old thing was silent for a long time. It was probably moved by Su Li's words. If it had the heart, the cold mechanical voice inexplicably had some emotions. "I told you before that the group of 5 left a back door in my core program. The data fragment in the replacement chip behind your neck activated my back door. That is why I sent you a request to contact me. What does this have to do with that old story of vicissitudes?" Sulu put the cigarette into his mouth with 3 fingers and took a deep breath. He did not ask seriously. Although many people thought that he was the most talented engineer in the Federation, he, who seriously lacked academic education, did not seem to care much about the answer that many scholars would care about. "The data fragment is very similar to my core program design. In other words, we should come from the same source. You said this before." Sulu pressed the cigarette butt into the crack of the brick beside him and said, "I went to the Empire to help you find the answer, but I'm very sorry that I couldn't find it. They don't have mechanical intelligence as awesome as yours. Looking further into the starry sky, the source should be there. What I don't understand now is why the information fragment that comes from the same source as mine is of a higher level than mine. Why would it appear in the Empire? As you said, the mechanical intelligence in the Empire is still in a primitive and ignorant stage." "Higher? How is it higher?" Sulu asked. "You can understand it as a higher IQ. The old thing was silent for a moment before explaining. The story of vicissitudes before the great catastrophe that you want to know should be related to the information fragment in the chip behind your neck. As for the part that I know, Sulu said, although I haven't washed my ears, I'm listening seriously. It's actually a very simple story, the old thing said calmly. The old man said calmly, the previous generation of civilization created by humans was destroyed in a great disaster, which is what we call the great catastrophe now. The group of 5 escaped in a spaceship, experienced a long interstellar journey and came to the planet you are on now. The current Federation society is the descendant of the fleeing passengers carried on the spaceship. I was the star map calculation computer of that spaceship. After the spaceship landed on S1, it disintegrated and I was modified into my current appearance. This is a story that many novels have speculated about. Is that simple? Sulu frowned and said in a low voice, what kind of catastrophe could actually destroy a generation of civilization? Any story can be summarized into an extremely simple context, which you usually call an outline. As for the complete narration, of course, there is a huge amount of complex details that can be provided. However, you often call it invalid content filler, and on the internet it is usually called filler. If you really want to hear the complicated vicissitudes of life story, I suggest that you treat your injuries immediately and then leave this city. Got it, I'll do it right away. Sulu used the sniper rifle as a crutch and stood up with difficulty using the wall as support. Even such a simple action affected the numerous wounds on his body, causing endless pain. In the dark underground sewer, the Federal Central Computer clearly observed his movements through some unknown means and analyzed his injuries and the speed at which his life was flowing away. It said, sometimes I really find it hard to understand many of the behavior patterns of humans. For example, you are now facing such a high probability of death, but there is no trace of fear in your physiological data and brainwave analysis. You must know that the fear of death is instinctive and cannot be removed. A guy like you who is almost immortal can't understand what short-lived monkeys like us think. Who is not afraid of death. It's just that humans are good at forgetting or disguising themselves. They don't think about the destination, so they can easily embark on the journey. Sulu picked up the heavy rifle and slowly walked into the depths of the underground sewer. He explained with a smile, and indeed there is nothing to be afraid of. I never thought that I could go back alive. Because of this powerful sentence, the dark underground sewer suddenly became silent. After a long time the old thing said calmly, indeed no one can leave this world alive. Your cold joke is very interesting. Hearing the answer that was beyond his logical judgment, Sulu smiled bitterly and said with emotion, such bold words were interpreted as a cold joke. You're really a boring guy. I didn't get the passionate response I expected. I am very disappointed. The low and almost inaudible footsteps gradually disappeared. The back of the man who was walking forward with difficulty was slowly swallowed by the darkness. Together with the old thing who had no back, they walked into the depths of the dark underground sewer. Occasionally, a few words of conversation could be faintly heard. To be honest with you, by my side I don't worry about dying at all. Just like on that planet of the Empire when the sky was filled with missiles, you would definitely ride the black tri-winged ship and break through the colorful clouds to pick me up. But have you ever experienced my painful psychological struggle? The pain of the core program conflict is no less than the pain your body is suffering now. And I faintly feel that something very bad is happening. The pressure is very great. In order to relieve this kind of emotional reaction in the core program, I even gave myself the name Philip. Philip? Sounds good. I will call you that in the future. But is there any interesting connotation behind the name you chose? Oh, I forgot. Although you have a lot of connotation, you have never been an interesting guy. Philip is a famous person in the history books before the catastrophe. Legend has it that he walked on the edge of the offside all his life. Some people even said that he lived on the offside line. This is very similar to my current situation. Chapter 797. The 17th pier was not a pier, but a famous leisure area in Gangdu. Bars and restaurants were quietly hidden in the complicated streets and alleys. The strange tension in the air of the city these days obviously had no impact on the daily enjoyment of the rich people. It was still an autumn afternoon, but there were already many expensive cars driving into the deep passageway under the careful guidance of the doorman. With the brim of his hat tightly covering his head, Sulu walked quickly through the street. He was wearing a sports windbreaker that he had just stolen from a warehouse in a shop. The powerful government agencies that were chasing him probably did not focus their surveillance on these places. Many years ago he came to this leisure area called the 17th Pier. He once broke someone's finger in a restaurant. The finger of the director of the Nutshell Engineering Department was as crisp as an iced radish when it was broken. Magnolia killed the first person for Sulu in the back alley of another pub. The blood that splashed out of the neck of the guy who was either from the government or the Lee family was as light as the orange juice in the pub. Time passed and never came back. Everyone's life had changed so much that even though they were still young, they were already qualified to reminisce about the past like an old man. Sulu walked past the restaurant and pub with his head slightly lowered. He was a little nostalgic, but he did not go in. Instead, he walked along the slightly sloping ramp to a high-end residential area. The afternoon sun shone on Mulberry Lake, dispelling the thick fog on the lake in the largest city in the Federation. The sun was reflected into countless golden lights, penetrating the luxurious floor-to-ceiling windows and swaying warmly in the spacious living room. Sula did not know who the owner of this high-end residential area was. He just randomly picked a house and broke in. Of course, that door was not broken. The alloy door with the most advanced composite anti-theft measures was useless in front of his steady fingers and tools. All hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies in Gangdu were under strict surveillance. There were 3 thrilling battles, all because of his urgent need for medicine. In this case, he chose another simpler and more direct method, which was to break into people's houses to search for the medicine he needed. It must be said that Suli's luck had always been good. He did not stay in the bedroom for too long before he found what he needed the most. In addition, he also found a lot of compressed nutrition bars and 2 very professional first aid kits in the storage cabinet. From the number and the details in the room, he roughly guessed that the owner of this high-end residential area should be a senior doctor in a hospital in Gangdu. He walked out of the restaurant like a wild animal with soft meat on the soles of his feet. He did not make a sound. Looking at the little boy sitting cross-legged under the floor-to-ceiling window, he frowned and subconsciously pushed the sniper rifle into his windbreaker, not wanting to reveal anything. After entering this high-end residential area, he found that there was a little boy in the room. Before he angrily accused the old man of being lazy, he was somewhat surprised to find that the little boy had been squatting under the floor-to-ceiling window, carefully disassembling something in the golden sunlight, and did not notice his intrusion at all. He went to the bedroom to search for medicine and went to the restaurant to search for food. During such a long process, the little boy by the floor-to-ceiling window never got up, nor did he look back. Holding a standard 6-star repair knife in his small hand, he was unusually focused on dealing with the things on the ground. Sulu, who was about to leave, looked at the little boy's dyed blonde hair under the sun, and his tightly knitted brows gradually relaxed. After hesitating for a moment, he quietly walked forward, wanting to see what actually made the little boy so focused. The little boy was trying to disassemble an electronic alarm clock. The hard alloy head of the standard 6-star repair knife left countless scratches on the inner shell of the clock. It seemed that he had tried many times but still could not open it. In the golden sunlight, Sulu stood behind the little boy and watched him focus. After a long silence, he finally could not help but whisper, "Tilt down 60 degrees and pry up." This is the most shameless patented design of the alarm clock company against people like us. There is no other way but to use force. 20 seconds later. Using a hat to cover his face, Sulu quickly ran out of the neighborhood. It seemed that the little boy's sharp screams were still echoing in his ears. He felt that he really did not have the face to see anyone, especially not the face to see the old man who kept nagging and mocking him in his mind. Can you imagine? In order to prevent people like us from disassembling it, the company that produces the electronic alarm clock actually came up with such a despicable method, and they even have the face to apply for a patent. Sulu, who was walking quickly under the wall, in order to hide his embarrassment, angrily criticized, "I just reminded the little boy of myself many years ago, so I couldn't help but tell him that the only way is to use force." But this seriously destroys the fun of the little boy's exploration. The Federal Central Computer quickly retorted in his mind, "I think you have the desire to preach in your bones. If I remember your birthday correctly, according to the old era's constellation classification, you are a Scorpio bastard. When I was in the repair shop, the fun was often destroyed by that guy too." Su Lu remembered the disgusting but proud smile of the uncle back then and subconsciously curled his lips and said, "Philip, although it is fighting time now, you have to allow me to have some of my own mental life. Although this is my name, I still feel that it is a bit strange to be called this by you. I hope you can continue to call me old man or the great unknown existence." Philip. Speak. I really miss the life in the Eastwood Mines operations room. But I can't go back anymore. Meeting was not as good as reminiscing. Often, it was because it was difficult to meet again, so the old woman would often think of her first love before her sickbed, that or those young men in white fluttering clothes. Moreover, she would subconsciously refuse to believe that those young men didn't belong to her, only willing to leave behind or fabricate the most beautiful side in her memories. Just like what was said before, Su Lu was still young, but he began to sigh like an old man about the past. It was because he seemed to vaguely sense a shadow even vaster than the sea of stars slowly and unstoppably drifting over. Perhaps it was the most helpless failure or the most miserable death. This familiar yet strange city was full of enemies. If he wanted to tear everything to shreds and obtain the freedom and right to return to the past, it was easier said than done. But he wasn't afraid. Apart from the sniper rifle in his bosom and the hard military knife by his calf, it was also because he firmly believed that he was never fighting alone. This universe might not have any reason, but there were old men and many people like the owner of the department store in the foothill who were willing to help him in the face of the strange and tense political atmosphere that was lurking behind the scenes. The big families maintained their silence. The old man in the round hat and the two young successors that he had high hopes for were silently resisting the various bills that the federal government had introduced with the help of public opinion. However, they did not use the vast financial ocean that they controlled to challenge the economic lifeline of the government, which was the most important thing to them. The madam in the back mountain of Mocho was similarly silent, even appearing to be too reserved. This was because they had enough confidence to face such a situation. Since the 37th Constitution era, the leaders of these big families were once most afraid of the military godly Pifu. Later on, they were most troubled by the existence of Su Lu, but they never feared the Federation government from the bottom of their hearts. They firmly believed that anyone with ideals and firm goals, even those with ambitions, was not to be feared. So they had to restrain the madness in their hearts. Then they could negotiate. As a result, they indifferently watched the drama unfold. When the time was right, they might as well provide some convenience for Su Lu, but they definitely wouldn't personally participate. This was the so-called delicate flesh was precious. The Federation's proverb once said that a millionaire with a net worth of tens of millions would never sit under a wall that was about to collapse. And no matter who won between Su Lu and the government in their eyes, this broken wall was already trembling and in danger. What about the others? Madman Li, who was preparing to force a violent and delightful battle with Princess Su Meng, was urgently called back by the federal military. In the eyes of many people, he was the only one in the entire Federation who could deal with a terrifying figure like Su Lu. However, after the argument between the father and son in the office, General Li Jiedu realized that he had made a serious mistake. He didn't hesitate to strip his son of all command rights. Li Feng knew that he had also made a serious mistake. If it weren't for the angry argument, the troops that hunted down and killed Su Lu would have been under his personal command. If that had really happened, this battle might have become very interesting. However, the youngest colonel in the Federation didn't have the shrewdness of a seasoned politician. He was full of anger and sadness, and he couldn't control his emotions at that time. He didn't join the team that hunted down and killed Su Lu. He couldn't find a suitable wedge point to help that guy. Li Feng was like a strong young tiger, silently following the combat troops that belonged to Small Eyes. He followed the powerful special forces that had undergone special training in Philadelphia, appeared in the capital airport, appeared in the underground passage of the hospital building, and then followed them to Harbor City. This kind of silent stare gave the two combat units a great deal of psychological pressure. Madman Li's violent and vicious reputation had spread throughout all the military camps since he was 12 years old. The Special Forces soldiers didn't understand why he was following them silently, and they didn't know when he would violently charge over and tear them all to pieces. Faced with this silent and terrifying gaze, all the powerful organizations of the Federation couldn't drive away or arrest Li Feng because he wasn't Su Lu. He didn't have any crimes on him. More importantly, he was the grandson of the god of war, the son of Li Jedu, and the only heir of the Lees of Philadelphia. Therefore, the big killing weapon that the Federation government used to deal with Sulu now became a risk factor that they had to seriously consider. Even with the consent of General Li Jedu, the Small Eyes Department specially arranged for a very powerful force to be responsible for monitoring his movements. Madman Li didn't seem to notice. He was still silent, following the crowd and watching covetously. Chapter 798. Capital Special District. After confirming that the delivery of the goods was not discovered by the military, So Yu's expression finally relaxed a little. Her frowning eyebrows gradually relaxed. She tiredly rubbed her forehead, took off the red flower in her hair and put it next to the screen. Then she turned around and walked downstairs. Her father, Zhou Yingxing, was inspecting the strategic reserve bases in the major galaxies according to Mr. President's request. He should be somewhere in the S3 base right now. Everyone knew that Minister Zhou would never be able to return to the position of Minister of Defense, but the Shishan compound did not take back the mansion at this time. In the eyes of the big shots in the Capital Special District, Zhou Yingxing was just an old dog in front of Mo Chao's wife. Otherwise, how could he be promoted from the director of the General Assembly base to the position of Minister of Defense? However, in the past 6 years, especially during the war with the Empire, Zhou Yingxing fully proved his ability and even courage in addition to his scholarly demeanor. Even though he was dejected now, he still had enough respect. Zhou Liuhua was running quickly next to the coffee table on the first floor, making a funny face and laughing at his cousin. Because he was worried that his mother was in a bad mood, Zhou Yu and his wife asked for leave to go home. After greeting her brother and sister-in-law with a smile, Zhou Yu sat down and arranged the fragrant flower pots in the guest room with her mother. She had been raised to be the princess of the Tai family since she was a young girl, so she was no stranger to this kind of work that required careful thinking. However, today she didn't know why, but she felt a little irritated, especially when she saw her son running quickly and making an exaggerated smile. She couldn't help but gradually frown. Zhou Liuhua didn't know who he inherited this trait from. Although he was very young, he was already smart and cunning enough to keenly capture his mother's emotions. He, who was usually very arrogant, subconsciously shivered and hid behind his uncle. Zhou Yu looked at his sister with a frown and asked, "Are you worried about Sulu? These worries don't make any sense. You should know what he has done these days. No matter how open-minded or even cowardly the government is, it won't allow him to live anymore. Sister, I advise you to be mentally prepared." Zhou Yu's expression didn't change as she gently nodded. Looking at her daughter's trembling right hand, Mrs. Zhou raised her head angrily. She glared at her son and scolded, "Don't talk nonsense." Beside Philadelphia Lake, Jian Shuier sat silently on the large blue stone. She stared blankly at the surface of the lake that had complicated patterns blown by the autumn wind, as well as the blurry reflection of the snow mountain that was disturbed by the ripples of the water. Her perfect face was unusually calm. "When I was very young, I dared to leave Philadelphia alone. At that time the old man was still alive. He was so angry that he filed a lawsuit, but he still couldn't bring me back to Philadelphia. In the end he respected my choice." Sister Tong, who was standing behind her, was silent. She knew very well that the big blue stone that Miss was sitting on was the same one that military god sat on every day for 10 years. Jian Shuier gently tucked her hair behind Bai Ying's ear and rubbed her eyebrows with her slender fingers. A trace of mockery flashed across her perfect and vivid face. She said, "Now that he's gone, I've been caught and brought back to Feiqing City. I'm under house arrest and can't leave this place. There is no one more powerful than him in the universe. This only proves that even family members have strong and distant feelings for each other." Elder Sister Tong looked at the soldiers that appeared and disappeared around the lakeside. She let out a long sigh and comforted, "General Li Zidao is your cousin after all. In fact, you know very well why he did this. This matter is too big. Miss, you can't make things too difficult for General Li. The small-eyed man that he was determined to kill is called Sulu. He is my fiancé." Jian Shuier slowly turned around and stared at Sister Tong. "Who is making things difficult for whom?" S2 surrounded the mountains in 4 states. This Federation's heavy industrial base planet was near the vast Green Dragon Mountain. It had only been a few months since the smoke of war had dispersed, but it was already quite lively. The magnificent Coco nightclub had a delicate name, but it had become a legendary place that everyone in this area knew about, but few people knew the real reason. Therefore, when he knew that the other party had arranged the meeting place here, Chairman Fu Jie felt that it was acceptable. Fu Jie, the chairman of the Federation's Heavy Machinery Industry Workers Union, had a high prestige in the hearts of the low-level workers and the instigation power that countless capitalists hated. He knew this very well, so he didn't understand why the young senator sitting opposite him wanted to see him. He didn't even know why he wanted to come. Perhaps it was just the innate awe of a certain historical existence that was at work in his subconscious mind. The youngest senator in the history of the Oak State calmly invited the other party to tea. He held a cup of coffee and said slowly, "Mr. Chairman, is it difficult for the unions to fight lawsuits against the business owners now?" "That's right, after all, Mr. President can't fight lawsuits for you all his life. As for my suggestion, you can consider it. Although my law firm called Shizhou isn't very famous, it has the most outstanding lawyer in the Federation. It should be qualified to be the special legal counsel of the union." For some reason, the young senator in front of him had a pale face and a thin body, looking like a patient who could easily be blown away by the wind. However, Chairman Fu Jie's heart beat faster because of the pressure from these gentle words. He couldn't help but regret that he didn't bring in those strong caregivers just now. At least they could have added some of his aura. All the members of the union are very grateful for Mr. President's selfless help for more than 10 years. His moral character is unquestionable. Senator Fu, although I'm just an ant in the eyes of you and the family behind you, please allow ants to have the self-esteem of ants. I've never questioned Mr. President's moral character. In fact, when I facilitated his visit to Green Dragon Mountain, I believed in his moral character more than anyone else. Tai Ziyuan held the cup of coffee and slowly took a sip. Perhaps he was thinking of the past events that happened in Yue University, and thus remembered an old acquaintance who disappeared in the crowd in Harbor City. His expression seemed a little cold and indifferent. But people change. Mr. President can sacrifice Commander Zhong for the benefit of the Federation. Now he sacrificed Colonel Su Lu for the stability of the Federation. No one can say when or why he will sacrifice you and the simple and respectable workers in the union. Once you get used to the method of sacrifice, it's easy to get addicted to it. Because the one who sacrifices is others, but the one who benefits is yourself. He raised his head and looked at Fu Jie calmly. What's more, what is the goal of a person's life? Mr. President, I suggest you think about this problem at a deeper level. According to George Carlin, a capital and power like me will never voluntarily hand over the power in my hands. But if I do, you can also get more practical feedback. Of course, this is a proper feedback for your years of dedication to the struggle of industrial workers. Then wouldn't it be a very perfect ending? You just said that people change, Li Yao said. Chairman Fu Jie raised his right hand and used his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his forehead. He looked at Tai Ziyuan and said in a trembling voice, "How can you guarantee that you won't change, that you won't go back on your words? My surname is Si. My family and I have existed in this part of the universe for tens of thousands of years, and will continue to exist. Mr. President only has 2 5-year terms, so he needs to change, but I don't." Harbor City Industrial Park. The engineers of the Shell Motor Company stretched their stiff limbs and walked out of the room. They had just completed the electromagnetic beam cluster array test in the West Woods. The benchmark positioning data had been summarized, but they still needed to wait for the matching formula of the curvature of the Earth's crust. Taking advantage of this time, according to Shang Qiu's request, they carried out continuous turbo pressurization tests on the MXT mecha they had dragged back from the West Woods. "I'm not going. You guys go ahead." Shang Qiu shook her head at the invitation of her subordinates. Her hands reached behind her head and quickly twisted her black hair. Then she fixed it with a pen. Because of this action, the exaggerated curves in front of her chest were extremely clear. The male nerds collectively avoided the gaze of her subordinates. Today, Shang Qiu was the independent technical director of the Shell Motor Company. In terms of rank and treatment, even the head of the engineering department was her subordinate. None of these engineers dared to question her orders. Moreover, ever since Colonel Su Lu had been put on the wanted list, her bad mood was written all over her face. The white MXT mecha glowed with a faint silver light in the warehouse. Shang Qiu held her chin and stared blankly at it. She remembered that when she and Sulu were researching and developing the MX in the engineering department, they had named the experimental mecha Little White Flower. She couldn't help but smile. With the help of countless wave detection protocols and mechanical code locks, the Federation government closely monitored all military mecha to prevent Sulu from using his authority under the Constitution to directly control mecha to carry out terrorist attacks. Even all the experimental mecha in the Shell Motor Company were no exception. There was a special monitoring program. As long as someone tried to hack the control system, it would automatically trigger an alarm. In the dead of night, there was not a single person in the empty warehouse. Shang Qiu stood up and walked towards the white MXT mecha. Unknowingly, a black box had appeared in her hands. With great difficulty, Shang Qiu climbed onto the cockpit platform of the MXT mecha. She immediately turned on the mecha's mainframe computer and began the pre-activation of combat mode. A torrent of program sentences flashed across her lenses like a waterfall. The genius female engineer easily cracked the program one by one. She muttered to herself, "Gu Shifeng has gone to the front lines and you're a computer idiot. I'll help you bring this guy back to life. Don't forget to thank me." After quickly completing all the program work, Shang Qiu used the back of her hand to wipe away the sweat on her slightly red cheeks. She sighed in satisfaction and patted the black box beside her that Zhou had secretly transported from the capital. Then she set an extremely complicated password. No one knew what this password was, but Sula did. Chapter 799. The Empire's resistance group had ended their visit in the West Woods. The negotiations for assistance were also in progress. However, for some reason the group did not intend to leave immediately. They remained in the room on the top floor of the Golden Star Hotel. Huai Chaosher frowned slightly as he looked at the TV screen. He was not used to those soft erotic advertisements. If these advertisements appeared on the Empire's TV screen, the owner of the TV station would definitely be invited to tea by the Empire's Anti-Corruption Bureau the next day. The images of the battlefield shown on the news made him feel a little incredulous. Which TV station in the Empire dared to broadcast such content when it involved military secrets? Were the people involved not worried about being locked up in the interrogation center of the Intelligence Bureau? The images of the Federation's elections and sporadic reports of demonstrations were very unfamiliar to this princess of the Empire. Previously, the pro-Federation TV station in the West Woods actually reported that the commander of the 4th Military Region's Rapid Response Brigade was stripped of his military position because he disobeyed the orders of his superiors. This made it even more difficult for her to get used to. According to what you said, this means that the Zhong family's old house is falling further. That extremely stupid Zhong Ziki in the intelligence report is starting to take control of the situation? She looked back at Mu En coldly and asked. Mu En said, "Even if Zhong Ziki is in power, he's just a puppet. The one who really controls the situation in the West Woods should be that Mr. President." Huai Chaosher was silent for a moment. He remembered the news he saw when he just landed in the Sunset State, the news that Sulu was wanted. For some reason, a dangerous and angry flame began to jump in his eyes. He stared at Mu En expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, "What is the Federation's response to our request?" After the negotiations between the two sides ended, the Empire's resistance group suddenly proposed to the Federation that they wanted to visit the capital ring to promote understanding and communication between the people of both sides. This seemed to be a beautiful and reasonable proposal, but it puzzled the Federation government. The other side is still considering and did not give a definite answer, Mu En replied in a low voice. "Tell them that you requested to meet with Colonel Sulu. Tell them that you only trust him, and that all cooperation will only be effective if Colonel Sulu personally guarantees it," Huai Chaosher ordered. Mu En raised his head in shock, looked at him and said, "Sulu is wanted by the Federation government. How could they agree to this request?" "I don't care." Huai Chaosher stared dangerously into his eyes and said coldly, "Take out your toughest attitude. You must achieve your goal." In a certain base in the garrison area of Port City, the new MX mechas that had been transported in by multi-axle trucks began to inject energy. The soft electronic sound of the mecha self-checks converged in one place, clearly transmitted to the side of the road outside the base. 4 big bowls of white rice, a jean of red braised meat and a bottle of bright red old chili oil. Madman Li, who had an astonishing appetite, was eating in a small roadside restaurant. Although the red chili oil rice here was not as authentic as the one in Wait 2 district, it could relieve some of his grief. Then his ears that were many times more sensitive than the average person's clearly captured the familiar sound of the mecha self-checks. His delicate eyebrows that were brimming with vitality slowly furrowed, once again beginning to exude a certain aura called ruthlessness. According to the intelligence he had obtained from the Westwoods compound, because of Su Li's extremely strange high-level authority, the Federation rarely used heavy weapons in the process of pursuing him, such as mechas or even missile arrays. The Federation was worried that these high-precision heavy weapons that required a high degree of automation would instead be captured by Su Li's strange authority in battle. Then what did the mecha self-checks in the base at this moment mean? Could it be that Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division already had the confidence to challenge Su Li's authority? Li Feng pulled out 2 pieces of tissue paper, wiped his mouth haphazardly and stood up. Following his movements, the soldiers around the small restaurant responsible for monitoring him also stood up nervously. One of the captains advised, "Colonel, please." Before he could finish, the captain's body was directly sent flying, heavily smashing into the old wall of the small restaurant. Immediately after, the wind from the fist swept through the restaurant. The sound of tables and chairs shattering rang out one after another. In an instant, several of the soldiers closest to Li Feng were knocked unconscious on the ground. When the dust settled, the Federation soldiers inside and outside the restaurant could no longer find Li Feng's figure. On the only undamaged table were 4 oily dishes, a small bowl of leftover soup and a few banknotes. The president came and left. Nominally, it was to build momentum for the election, but in reality, in the 1 day and 1 night in Harbor City, he only attended a small banquet. From Harbor City to the capital, President Pabre chose to take the high-speed rail. Although the speed was slower, it was safer and he could directly work in the high-speed rail box. For the Special Task Force in the Small Eyes Unit, the most important reason for choosing the high-speed rail was that if the president was attacked, at least there would be a chance to evacuate. The president's transportation route and itinerary had always been closely guarded, but it was not too difficult for someone to obtain the most accurate time. Wearing a dark sports windbreaker and carrying a heavy travel backpack, Sulu walked into the familiar industrial park in the early hours of the morning. However, because he chose to go through the underground passage, he could not see the familiar giant factory buildings and busy freight trains shuttling back and forth. With his rich combat experience, he did not choose to launch a surprise attack when the president was in Harbor City, because he believed that even an idiot like Lin Daohai could clearly smell the scent of a trap from the sudden arrangement of the official residence in Harbor City. Not to mention there was a huge shadow of danger floating in his heart. He rested quietly in the underground passage for a few days. Using the medicine and first aid kits that he stole or robbed from the 13 high-level communities, he fully treated the injuries on his body. His physical condition was greatly improved, and his mental state was also adjusted to the best state. Passing through the deep and long passage, he pushed open the door above his head and saw the MXT mech with a metallic luster. It stood calmly in front of the warehouse as if it had been waiting for him. Philip. Philip. Yes. Old Faye, thank you for helping me to change those damn data. In the dark and stuffy cockpit, Sula calmly looked at the data of the mech's self-check. Although he believed that Shang Qiu had already made the most perfect preparations before leaving Little White Flower for him, as a true ace pilot, he was used to controlling the mech himself before a battle. In order to counter Su Li's ability, the federal military had already started a temporary plan. The mech heat start ban monitoring devices in various places had been monitoring at the highest frequency. If it was not for the Federal Central Computer helping Sulu to change the relevant data, the moment he activated the mech, he would have been discovered by the other party. You're welcome. After a moment of silence, the old man replied with a smile, "Serving you is my hobby." He did not know when it started, but the old man's voice in Suli's mind had become a little strange. Sometimes it was cold and mechanical and sometimes it was lively and lively. Moreover, the time between the 2 responses was getting longer and longer. It felt like a human wanting to say something but stopping. Facing the most important and dangerous battle of his life, Sula did not notice these easily overlooked details. He slowly stroked the black leather case, feeling the warmth from Zhou from afar. He smiled slightly and began to install the simulation system that Jian Shuier had given him years ago. Faye, if you were willing to obey me earlier like today, who in the Federation would be a match for the two of us? When faced with a really big situation, Sulu would always become calmer and calmer. Then he would return to his ridiculous and mocking self from when he was an orphan in Donglin. He would say, I really don't know what you were doing earlier. Why did you have to create so many problems? You made me so battered. Su Li's complaints were actually very reasonable. If the Federal Central Computer had been like it was now from the beginning, giving up the constraints brought by the 3 laws of core programming and ignoring the privacy regulations, presenting all the details of the Federation before his eyes, and even helping him to calculate the most reasonable battle strategy, perhaps this battle between an individual and the Federation would have ended with Su Li's victory long ago. This was because the current so-called Federation was only the government, while the glory of the Charter was everything. In the morning light, a little white flower stained with dew left the Shell Motor Corporation engineering department. A heavy crane worker later recalled that he had indeed seen a silver-white military mecha driving at high speed towards the other side of the mountain in the mist. However, at that time, there were no alarms in the industrial park and no one had noticed this scene. In a certain mountainous area in the southwest suburbs of the port city, the hard tracks of the first port city high-speed rail glimmered below. The silver-white MXT mecha was hidden in the forest high up in the mountains. Occasionally it would emit a glow, but it was cut into countless shards by the dense autumn leaves as if it was really dew. Sulu looked at the superimposed image of the SCC Global Surveillance System and infrared imaging on the screen. He looked at the tracks at the foot of the mountain and listened to the clear countdown. He silently sighed in his heart. That old bastard Philip's calculation of the time node was indeed extremely accurate. The president's high-speed train would pass through the tracks at the foot of the mountain in a moment. In the short but seemingly endless wait, the voice of the Federation's central computer, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly rang out in his mind. You once asked me what the civilization before the Great Catastrophe was like. In my opinion, that civilization was actually exactly the same as it is now. That world, the world of the Federation and the world of the Empire, there was no essential difference. For tens of thousands of years, humanity seemed to have not made any progress. Suspended in the dim cockpit, Sulu lowered his head and looked at the control stick in his left hand. His fingers moved at lightning speed on the 17 taps as he silently listened to the old bastard's voice. Even if you killed the president of the Federation, there would be no essential changes to this world. Moreover, according to my calculations, you should be very worried that the Federation would be in turmoil because of the president's death. Sulu was silent for a moment before replying. The old man and the minister both warned me, but I'm really only good at being a cleaner. I'm in charge of destruction, and I believe that the Federation will naturally have people who will be in charge of construction. The more remote the place where that guy died, the easier it will be for the people in charge of construction to clean up the mess. He smiled and said, You once told me that the presidents who were assassinated by the 7 families all died of illness in the history books. The hard tracks at the foot of the mountain began to vibrate at a high frequency. The train was coming. Chapter 800. The train came and the train left. Other than a few yellow leaves, nothing else happened. In the depths of the dense autumn forest, the white MXT mecha silently and calmly squatted, reflecting the morning light from the distant horizon into a dew-like existence. When Su Li's right hand was about to touch the command light screen, the electron beams in the dual-engine holding room of the mecha were about to turn into a fried dough twist, igniting an unparalleled powerful roar and pushing the heavy mecha towards the train down the mountain. A sharp alarm sounded in the dim cockpit. The Federal Central Computer informed him as quickly as possible. President Pobre was not on the train. The light in the cockpit maintained an extremely low lumen. Su Li's finger that was on the touchlight screen slowly retracted, an inexplicable emotion showing on his slightly thin cheeks. Looking at the quiet valley through the close-up light screen, he vaguely understood that this was a meticulously woven trap by the government, and he did not know how many heavy weapons were coldly aimed at him. However, he did not understand why he would fall into this trap, especially when the old man had the name Philip and began to unscrupulously help him. What method did the government and the military use to be able to hide from the omnipresent the glory of the Charter? Before he could communicate with the old man and clear up his doubts, Su Li's fingers were gradually turning cold, and the shrill alarm of the MXT Mecha's central computer rang in his ears again. The SCC's global surveillance system had discovered 3 high-speed missiles in the atmosphere dozens of kilometers away. The Inferno Standard Mark II missile, the main missile model of the Federal Fleet. It had a huge yield and a terrifying cruising speed. In past wars, this missile was mainly used to attack the Empire's high-speed warships in space battles, but today the Federal military used it to attack a mecha in the valley, the capital's West Mountain compound. More than a dozen fully armed military police knocked on the door of the independent building, politely and irrefutably requesting the former minister's daughter to be investigated. Zoe walked down from the second floor. After a moment of silence, she roughly understood what had happened, but she did not know what method the Federation government used to monitor that she sent the black box to Harbor City through Black Hawk. Amidst her brother's angry scolding and her mother's melancholy sobbing, she smiled comfortingly. She put on a red windbreaker over her nightgown and calmly put a bright red flower in her hair. Then she followed the murderous military police out of the door. A high-end apartment building in Harbor City Industrial Park. Shang Qiu rubbed her sleepy eyes and opened the door. She took the official arrest warrant from the hands of the military police, carefully put on her glasses and carefully read for a long time before returning the electronic document. She didn't try to resist or scream in anger. She just lowered her head and looked at the white and tender cleavage in the collar of her pajamas. She asked for a change of clothes and calmly explained, "I haven't brushed my teeth yet." The powerful roar of the MXT Mecha's twin engines abruptly shattered the tranquility of the valley. The tired birds that had just been woken up by the high-speed train once again opened their sleepy eyes in fear. As if sensing the majestic presence in the dense forest, they did not dare to remain in bed, chirping as they flapped their wings and flew out of the canopy. In the dim cockpit, Su Li's left hand tightly gripped the control stick, his fingertips quickly pressing the 17 speed buttons. His right hand kept moving on the touchscreen. The simulation system that covered his whole body keenly captured all the thoughts that came from his bare skin, translating them into a language that the mecha could understand. Simple, clear, and infinitely perfect operation. Instantly starting the twin engines, the precision turbine began to pressurize into the cockpit. The heavy MXT mecha roared, shaking off the dew on its cold exterior, and instantly rushed forward 50 meters, violently smashing the dozens of autumn trees in front of it into pieces. For the extremely high cruising speed of the Blaze Standard Mark II missile, it only took an instant to cover a distance of several dozen kilometers. This was especially true for the adaptive tracking system at the front of the missile, which was the most feared thing for high-speed moving targets. The MXT mecha that was meticulously built by the Nutshell Engineering Department had a strong power output. Under Su Li's astonishing control, it could perform many inconceivable evasive maneuvers. However, he was not confident that he could avoid the 3 missiles that were tearing through the atmosphere, had already begun to descend and were about to hit the valley. Moreover, he believed that the federal military would definitely equip the Blaze Standard Mark II missile with the highest yield warhead today. The effective killing area after the missile hit would definitely be shocking. Sulu still did not press that red button. He ordered Little White Flower to take off her heavy coat and enter the most powerful overclocking state. According to his calculations, if he entered the overclocking state early, even if he could avoid the first wave of missiles, he would not be able to face the second and third waves that would definitely follow. There was a limit to how long the overclocking state could be maintained. Even if he could successfully break out of the invisible ambush around the valley, he would not be able to sustain the battle for a longer period of time. But why did he still want to fight for a longer period of time? The tall and heavy MXT mecha charged down the mountainside, knocking down autumn trees and startling the morning birds. Then following the hard tracks, it began to sprint due west. The capital was that way and President Pabre should also be there. If he could luckily avoid the 3 Blaze Standard Mark II missiles above the atmosphere, then today would definitely be a long battle. Right at this moment, in the dimly lit cockpit of the mecha, the central control computer once again emitted a shrill alarm. The SCC global surveillance system had captured that 3-4 kilometers away. A large concentration of electromagnetic beam bombs had begun to activate. A moment later, countless electromagnetic beam bombs that were highly destructive to mecha began to fly towards them in a dense mass. The face half hidden by the helmet was expressionless. Su Li's control was as steady as ever. Only he himself knew that the heart on the left side of his chest was falling bit by bit, turning cold bit by bit. It seemed like a perfect ambush strategy. The white MXT mecha that was sprinting along the tracks should not have any reason to survive. However, immediately after that, the officers in the temporary federal military base who were preparing to check the effects of the bombardment saw one scene after another through various monitoring devices that shocked them. This was especially true for the military engineers who were known for their rigor. They were so shocked by these completely illogical scenes that their eyes widened, their bodies trembling violently. Blaze 1 out of control. Blaze 2 out of control. Blaze 3 out of control. Warning. Blaze 3 out of control. The enormous light beam was playing the picture taken by the S-1 near-Earth military satellite. Everybody in the temporary base saw that the 3 Inferno missiles that had been specially modified to fly in the atmosphere suddenly deviated from the perfect trajectory that had been precisely calculated. The 3 descending Blaze missiles had long been activated with a high-precision automatic tracking system. According to the base's plan, they would accurately hit the fleeing MXT mecha in the blink of an eye. No one would have thought that these 3 missiles would, at this moment, as if they were performing a group dance. They adjusted their postures at the same time in unison and mysteriously flew out of the atmosphere. A few seconds later, 3 explosions occurred in space at the edge of the S-1 thin atmosphere. The high-yield warheads that did not require oxygen silently burned into rapidly expanding fireballs in space. The terrifying power even directly affected the transmission of information from the military satellite. The image on the temporary military base's screen shook violently for a moment, then turned into static. It was not over yet. What happened next made the Federation soldiers in the base feel even greater fear and shock. The hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs that were flying towards the target at high speed were suddenly unable to receive the satellite's remote signal. The electromagnetic beam bombs that were as dense as a swarm of flies actually became headless flies in an instant. Strong signal interference. For some reason, the military satellite transmitter has been forcibly shut down. An officer reported in a panic. The soldiers in the base stared helplessly at the screen in shock. Looking at the distorted data on the screen, they had no idea what else they could do in this situation. In the low altitude in the distance, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs that should have brought endless fear to Sulu had already become existences with extremely comical flight trajectories. Having lost their target, they flew in all directions in a crooked manner. Under the silent guidance of some great being, they did not land in any human settlements, but instead desperately spat out the last of their liquid fuel to fly over the electronic fence and into the vast protected wildlife area. Amidst the dense thuds, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs fell from the sky after exhausting their power, smashing heavily into the soft grass. It was as if the heavens had rained down a strange oil bucket. Amidst the continuous explosions, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs exploded in a very rhythmic manner. The dark blue electric arcs that were extremely lethal to mechas had no obvious effect on the soft and wet grass. The light rain of mud flew up and down, not even disturbing the field mice that were sleeping deep underground. A male bison that was patrolling its own territory looked at these strange things that fell from the sky in shock. Then a handful of wet mud hit its strong butt. Instantly it was enraged. Its nostrils exhaled white smoke in the morning breeze. Its round eyes seemed to see a blood-red war flag. With a loud roar, it lowered its head and pushed against the nearest electromagnetic beam bomb. Amidst the crisp sound, the bison pushed the heavily damaged electromagnetic beam bomb shell into a pond. After confirming its victory, it raised its head proudly. Stepping on the mud, it walked towards its many wives and concubines. The strange scenes that happened in the sky must be the old thing finally showing its endless power again. In the dim cockpit, Sulu, whose eyes were slightly red, showed a trace of a sincere smile. Outside the valley, there was a heavy armored team and the special forces under Small Eyes. The dense rain of bullets and the heavy individual firepower from the mountaintop interweaved around the white MXT mecha. Under Su Li's control, the MXT mecha seemed to have some kind of magic. Amidst the roaring of the engine, the heavy mecha carried out perfect evasive maneuvers tirelessly, destroying the heavy armored vehicles in front of it one by one. That guy definitely wouldn't help him hurt the Federation soldiers in the ambush circle. He thought this as he fought, and he agreed with the old thing's decision. Sula didn't know that in a place he couldn't see in the sky above, a Federation battleship was coldly watching him and starting to prepare to fire its main cannon. Of course, even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care too much, and he definitely wouldn't despair. Human matters were left to humans and mechanical matters were naturally left to the old thing. Chapter 801. A Federation light feather-class battleship floated in the space outside of S1's atmosphere. The light from the stars shone from the side, painting this giant black battleship into a mixture of light and darkness. The alloy gate under the battleship opened slowly and silently, revealing the chilling muzzle of the main cannon inside, aimed at a certain spot on the planet. The command hall at the front of the ship was extremely quiet. The officers quickly passed on important data. With the help of countless military satellites, the battleship's computer accurately located the white MXT mecha amidst the smoke on the surface. The coordinates from all directions entered the battleship, and the calculations were completed in an extremely short amount of time. A female lieutenant turned the power switch in front of her, looked at the progress of the energy injection on the screen of the workbench in front of her, and said expressionlessly, "Blade tip main cannon level 1 ready. Blade tip main cannon level 2 ready. Blade tip main cannon level 3 ready." The emotionless voice reverberated in the spacious hall. The originally extremely quiet environment actually became even quieter at this moment. All of the Federation officers stopped what they were doing, and with complicated emotions, looked towards the giant circular screen of light. They worked on the battleship all year round and knew very well what kind of terrifying result the moment that powerful main cannon fired, filled with the smell of destruction and cold beam of light would cause. There was no mecha in this world that could withstand the power of a battleship's main cannon. They waited silently, waiting for the death of the most outstanding soldier of the Federation. Some of the officers even quietly took off the military caps on their heads. Fire. Inside the alloy gate under the battleship, the giant main cannon platform once again protruded with the order. A dark blue light quickly lit up within the circular structure of the platform, and then connected to form a perfect circle. The light grew brighter and brighter and then suddenly extinguished. Compared to the massive body of the battleship, the main cannon looked like the sharpest tip of a dagger. In an instant, a beam of light filled with terrifying energy suddenly shot out. This beam of light, about 1 meter in diameter, was completely different from the dark blue of the platform's circular structure. Instead, it was incomparably pure white. In an instant, it tore through the cold space of the universe, tore through the thin air, and blasted towards the surface of S1. There was no divine kindness that was praised in the Bermuda religion, only a ruthless and destructive will that did not belong to this world. The officers in the battleship command hall subconsciously clenched their fists, but in the next moment, they saw an incomprehensible scene. The beam of light of the battleship's main cannon, which could not be controlled by human power once it left the platform, did not penetrate the entire world as everyone had imagined, but instead quickly spread out within a 2-kilometer range. Like snow under the scorching sun, like catkins under the spring breeze, like cotton candy under a girl, the terrifying pillar of light was mottled, peeled off, collapsed, and then disappeared in front of their eyes. What happened? The officers in the hall didn't react in time. They looked at their companions in a daze, wanting to confirm that it wasn't their imagination. Those officers who were prepared to express their condolences to Colonel Sulu slowly dropped their military caps to the ground. An alarm suddenly sounded in the command hall of the warship. The energy of the main cannon of the blade tip quickly dissipated at such a close distance, causing the temperature of the space below the hull to rise rapidly, rising from -100 degrees to more than 600 degrees in an instant. The alloy armor below the hull was severely damaged. Blue electric arcs floated in the air. The heavy anti-material land-based rapid-fire dense array on the hillside spat out bullets. Occasionally, smoke would rise, but more often than not, debris would fly everywhere. The sound of the heavy and hard MXT mecha colliding with the armored vehicle echoed through the forest like war drums. No Federation military mecha joined in the ambush, so the seemingly intense battle was not particularly difficult for Sulu. The alloy blade at the front of the MXT's right mechanical arm hummed softly in the morning wind. Other than the cracks on the edge of the blade, It was more because of the low-amplitude, high-frequency vibration of the alloy blade itself. This was a combat method that Sulu had figured out himself on the frontline battlefield. Relying on the high-speed vibration of the alloy blade, the seemingly strong armor of the Empire's tanks would often appear extremely fragile. Even if it could not break through the enemy's mecha in one hit, this terrifying high-speed vibration could also seriously damage the physiological indicators of the pilot in the cockpit. No matter how advanced the shock-absorbing design of the cockpit was, it would not be able to withstand the terrifying power of this high-speed vibration. Trembling looked like a simple action, but for a heavy and tall mecha, it required extremely delicate operation and almost unbelievable hand speed. For Sulu, this was not difficult. Plus, he had been used to trembling all the way from an orphan to a Federation hero. The dense circle of electromagnetic beams activated the landmines, which were immediately broken through. The relatively slow electric arcs shot out, causing some damage to the MXT mecha, but were unable to slow it down. Tanks were continuously destroyed, and the dense formation was overturned by the MXT's bullets. Once again it was broken through. The Federation's ambush circle looked so fragile. The anti-material roar on the hilltop gradually died down, and the smoke gradually dispersed. When the soldiers finally reacted, the white MXT mecha had already become a faint shadow in the distance. The MXT had left the railway line, but it was still running parallel to the railway line. There were many scratches on the surface of the silver-white mecha. A few of the armor had even been directly overturned, revealing the strong alloy brackets inside. It looked easy to break through, but in reality it was still very difficult. In the dull cockpit, Sulu lifted his helmet and silently wiped away the blood that seeped out from the corner of his mouth. At the last moment of the breakout, a concentrated array that had been hidden in the forest for a long time suddenly opened fire. It left a deep impression on him, but it also left him injured. In the dim light, his eyes were slightly red as he stared at the road in front of him. Although he was the one with the thickest nerves, the test of life and death on the battlefield as well as the intense battle itself had completely stimulated the most primitive strength in his body. The simulation system that looked like a tight leather suit on his body gave him a slightly numb feeling. Sulu remembered that this was most likely something that the old man had used in the past, and his eyes gradually narrowed. Back then the old man had driven that broken MX-37 mecha for thousands of miles, and under the shocked gazes of countless Imperial troops, he had killed the Emperor of the Empire. Then he was driving one of the two most advanced MXT mecha in the universe. Why couldn't he run thousands of miles from the port city to the capital? Little white flowers bloomed wildly beside the railway line. After breaking through the ambush, there were no federal forces gathering in the surrounding area for the time being. Sulu relaxed a little. He took out 2 compressed nutrition bars from the backpack beside him, broke them in half and quickly swallowed them. In the fierce battle earlier he had been controlling the loss of Junchi, so he wasn't too hungry. However, since the battle was still going to be long, he had to replenish some energy in advance. At this moment his tense nerves also needed to be relaxed. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Philip, you drive. I'm going to get some fresh air." "Alright, help me make a call while you're at it." In the autumn morning breeze, the cockpit door of the silver mecha that was speeding through the forest suddenly opened. Sulu walked out, stood on the sturdy cockpit door and lowered his head to light a cigarette. The unmanned mecha didn't slow down in the slightest. The surrounding forest was quiet, and the slightly cold autumn wind whistled and blew. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the road ahead. He took a deep breath of the spicy smoke and said into the communicator in his hand, "You know I'm on my way." "Stop. This won't do the Federation any good." President Pabre's deep voice slowly sounded. "For me, the more important thing is that it won't do you any good either," replied Sulu. "Do you really want to turn yourself into a notorious terrorist? I already admitted this identity in the dream a few years ago." The president's voice was abnormally calm. "Do you really think that the entire Federation has wronged you? Think about those people who helped you even if it meant breaking the law. Maybe after a while, you'll suddenly realize that the things you've been holding on to will become a painful joke." This was the first time since the start of the war that the president had voluntarily hung up the phone. In the capital airport, Pabre silently looked at the silent phone in his hand. He shook his head inexplicably and then walked down from the Federation 1. Under the vigilant protection of the Federation's most elite soldiers, He quickly walked to the car. He asked Director Breen, who had come to greet him, in a deep voice, "How's the situation over there? Why did another accident happen?" Director Breen lowered his voice and replied, "General Lee Jae-do and Director Choi have been keeping an eye on the Bureau of Proclamation. The biological marker comparison has been going on for a while now and there's some progress, but it seems that some problems have appeared again." In the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation, General Lee Jae-do, who looked a little tired, rubbed his sunken eyes and answered a call from Harbor City. Listening to the report on the phone, his expression was still calm. However, after hanging up the phone, he looked at Director Choi Judong with a sharp gaze. Since it was willing to give the clue about Zhou, why did it stop the missile and even the warship's main cannon from launching? How do you explain that? It's impossible to explain. This is something that I can't understand. Choi Judong didn't turn around. He didn't even care about Lee Jae-do's feelings. His expression was a little numb, but he was extremely focused on the front. The ambush circle in Harbor City has suffered heavy losses. Lee Jae-do's eyes slightly lowered and said slowly, "There has to be a reason for this. You two idiots. This is because he is making a judgment. He is in conflict. He is struggling." There was actually a third person in the quiet and dim underground hall. Biderman, who was sitting on the ground like a child, pointed at the huge translucent light screen in front of him and shouted almost crazily. Chapter 802. In the green streams of data that fell like a waterfall, the distortion of the few rows of data was not obvious. They looked like a few stone spikes sticking out of a magnificent waterfall, splashing up a few waves. However, in Biderman's eyes he seemed to see a great mechanical intelligent life that was thinking, conflicted, and struggling like a human being. The strong mental impact made his body, which was sitting on the ground, tremble violently. There were some very strange geniuses in the world. For example, Biderman, a former employee of the Bureau of Proclamation who was fired because he knew too many backdoors of the Federal Central Computer. This person seemed to have some kind of strange ability. He was able to translate the incomprehensible data streams on the light beam into something his brain could understand by relying on the reflex and intuition of a certain part of his brain. Although he could only vaguely understand the parts of the Great Corridor, it was enough for him to see the internal core state of the Federal Central Computer at this time. Biderman had been looking at the pictures below the Bureau of Proclamation for many days without rest. His body stank of sour sweat, his hair was messy like a bird's nest, there was a big bucket of cold coffee next to his hand, and there were several stimulant syringes on the ground under his feet. The expression on his face was as exaggerated as the rows of data on the light beam. He was unusually excited and slightly frightened, or perhaps frightened, which was the source of his excitement at this time. As a useless genius in the secular world, how could he not be excited when he suddenly found that the Federal Central Computer that he used to serve had come back to life? He firmly believed that the Federal Central Computer, a mechanical intelligent existence that was completely different from human carbon-based life, was the ultimate evolution that illuminated the future of this boring and monotonous universe. To be able to witness this historical moment, to be able to be in close contact with the greatest wisdom represented by the green streams of data, Biderman felt that even if he died on the spot he would not have any regrets in this life. Therefore he certainly did not care what kind of power the two big shots behind him had in the Federation. He kept mocking them in a shrill voice. The voice that was like steel needles was mixed with the hoarseness of extreme fatigue, which was extremely unpleasant to listen to. Director Choi Judong's performance was not much better than Biderman's. He sat on the chair like a puppet, his thighs constantly trembling, causing the legs of the chair to rub against the ground, making a very small sound. Among the three people in the field, only General Lee Jae-do was still very calm. He calmly looked at the green data flow on the light curtain without any expression on his face and asked, "Judging conflict and struggle? What did this mean? Does this mean that the Federal Central Computer has confirmed the results of the biomarker comparison?" Of course. Biderman opened the lid of the coffee can with his trembling fingers. His eyes did not move at all as he stared greedily and hungrily at the data flow on the light screen. He would never forgive himself if he missed a single scene. Anomaly number 72, coupled with the fact that the biomarker has been confirmed, the incident sequence has directly broken through the first sequence. But the problem is that Sulu has already obtained the protection authority of the first sequence. That's why there is a conflict. Don't you understand? Biderman quickly explained in an extremely unpleasant voice. He mocked and insulted, "You two carbon-based idiots should be crying in happiness right now. If the files I've read before are correct, then what you see today will be the only conflict of the highest authority of the Federal Central Computer after the Great Catastrophe." Being ridiculed and insulted by such an insignificant person, Cui Zhedong was immersed in painful and torturous thinking. He had been serving the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation for decades. In the past 2 years, whenever he thought of that great or terrible possibility, he would habitually remain silent to hide the panic in his heart. Li Jiedu did not respond to Biderman's words. He said softly, "Conflict of the highest authority? This is exactly what I need. That's why the central computer has become so erratic during this period. First, it helped the government to capture Su Lu, then it immediately helped him fight against society. My question is, how long will this conflict last?" According to the calculation mode of the core program, when there is a direct conflict of authority, she will immediately conduct a fog simulation and come to a conclusion. We often call it intuition. Oh, now that I think about it, it's really her intuition. It doesn't take long. But are you crazy? Why are you concerned about such a stupid problem at this time? Biderman was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He waved his arms angrily, spilling dark coffee all over his body. What we should be concerned about now is that she hasn't come to a conclusion after such a long time. She's still struggling with the conflict, which means that in addition to the cold mechanical intelligence, she already has feelings. I don't care about feelings. Li Jiedu slowly put his hands behind his back. He silently looked at the green stream of data on the light screen in front of him and said, "I only care if she has a spiritual world. Then will this deep conflict lead to the division of that world, self-denial until it perishes?" Hearing these cold words and thinking of a certain possibility, Biderman's body felt extremely cold. Just as he was about to grab the metal coffee can and kill Li Jiedu and Cui Zhedong behind him, a very strange scene suddenly appeared in his black pupils. It was the two-dimensional light screen hanging above the magnificent underground space. Like a sudden storm, the waterfall-like green data streams suddenly flowed at a high speed. Then, as if they had lost gravity, they violently shot in all directions. Thousands of data streams twisted and twisted together, silently and violently rubbing against each other, and then broke into pieces from the middle. The data fragments gradually faded from the original green color that was full of life and turned into countless white light spots. However, it was not over yet. The white light spots began to move irregularly and collide with the huge light screen. Their speed was getting faster and faster, violent and majestic. Gradually, it was beyond the extent that human eyes could see. They turned into dozens of light spots that condensed powerful energy. 2 thin streams of blood trickled down from the corners of Bademan's eyes, but he didn't seem to notice it at all. He curled his body into a ball and stared at the light screen like a baby. What he saw in his eyes was not the scene on the light screen, but an incomparably magnificent experience. The light spots condensed into nebulas and then countless bright stars, suspended in the dark space, silent and eternal. Biderman seemed to see the scene of the birth of a new universe. The fear in his eyes gradually turned into love and awe. His body gradually relaxed, but then his body suddenly stiffened. The thin blood lines at the corner of his eyes suddenly thickened. From the deepest part of his heart he screamed in despair, "No!" Countless stars began to move and could no longer stop. They crossed the vast space at an incomprehensible speed to the area on the left. The area on the right was only left with a dark void. The magnificent universe was forcibly divided into 2 sides of light and darkness by some force. The solemnity was replaced by the collision and tearing of violent forces, forming a terrifying black and white vortex. The vortex was extremely compressed and collapsed until it finally condensed into an invisible point. Then it exploded. No new nebulas were born, only silence. The universe was born and then annihilated. The magnificent and empty underground space was dead silent. As the beeping self-examination ended, a mechanical and emotionless electronic voice began to sound. Warning. Colonel Su Lu of the Federation, Original Citizen ID DLAS 420500481X. Additional Citizen ID SAT 5102000431X. has been identified as a member of the Empire's seed project through biological identification and related evidence. Serious warning. Sulu is the 72nd anomaly. The anomaly is an intruder of the Empire. This incident is automatically upgraded to a first-order incident. How could this be? How could this be? Biderman jumped up in panic and rushed toward the huge light screen in front of him. The flow of green data on the light screen was so calm and smooth that it seemed that there would be no change even after millions of years. No human could reach the core of the charter computer deep underground, and no one could reach its main energy supply center. The only thing that people could reach was the light screen that it generously extended to the ground. Biderman confirmed the fact and collapsed to the ground. He helplessly slapped the data column below the light screen and cried out, "Don't go. Don't go. Don't die." In the distant Bermuda Triangle Star region, a large smuggling ship was suffering unprecedented humiliation and torture. Not far away in space, a strangely shaped spaceship that looked like a pile of junk blocked their way. The smuggler's spaceship, which had extremely high speed, could not find any way to escape in front of this junk-like spaceship. The speed of that broken spaceship was so terrifying that it was shocking. Especially when they thought of the unimaginable acceleration of the spaceship, the smugglers' militants who were already in despair could not understand how the abominable crew in the broken spaceship could withstand such a huge force. The large smuggling ship had been hit by the junk-like spaceship more than 20 times in a row. The solid planks of the ship had long been damaged. The life support system had already started to sound the alarm. The weapons on the smuggling ship had clearly hit the spaceship several times, but it didn't seem to have any effect. What frightened the people on the ship the most was that without them knowing, the spaceship had directly hacked into their communication system. "I don't rob money. I don't rob food. I don't rob women. I only rob spaceships." A deep and powerful but extremely funny voice sounded inside the smuggling spaceship. "This young master's patience is very short. I order you to immediately enter the escape capsule and leave in 10 minutes. The smuggler stared at the junk-like space junk on the light screen in despair and helplessness. He painfully pulled his hair and roared angrily, "Do you have any fucking rules? We admit defeat and give you 4/5 of the goods. How can we give you the spaceship?" Chapter 803. Hearing the arrogant reply of the broken metal ship, the merchants and militants in the smuggling ship looked at each other thinking, "You don't want anything from a man and you don't want anything from a woman. What the fuck do you want?" Thinking of the terrible speed of the broken metal spaceship, the strong impact force, the thick outer armor, and the extremely strange request of the other party, the people who had been badly injured in the previous dozens of collisions, suddenly remembered a rumor that had been circulating in the Bermuda sector in recent months. Several groups of smugglers claimed that they had been robbed on the route. The spaceship that carried out the robbery was extremely powerful, but the owner of the spaceship had a bad taste that was most hated by the people of Bermuda. The other party seemed to be particularly interested in mechanical things. In addition, even those beautiful women who were worthy of Lynn Banshawn, he was not willing to take a second look at them. The leader of the militants swallowed a mouthful of saliva and moved closer to the smuggler. Looking at the broken spaceship that seemed to be dancing at a high speed and showing off its terrifying mobility, he lowered his voice and said, "Surrender. I heard that this spaceship has been in the left sky sector for the past 2 years. Even those guys in the Empire who were escorted by warships did not have any chance to fight back." The smuggler's body trembled slightly, and it did not take long for him to resolutely and honorably surrender. Since the other party allowed him to enter the escape capsule and did not want any goods, then even if he could not move the modified guns, he could still take the most expensive diamonds and recoup some losses. The smuggler, who was preparing to enter the escape capsule, looked back at the spaceship that he had spent a lot of money to build reluctantly and painfully. Suddenly he found that the broken metal spaceship in space began to dance again. He could not help but curse in a low voice, "Fuck you. Will you die if you don't show off?" In the dark and quiet space, the broken metal spaceship was trembling violently. The bloated body of the spaceship that could not be described with words was tumbling at a high speed in the thousands of kilometers of space, continuously making countless incredible flight movements. However, it did not seem to be showing off. Instead, it was more like a human brain that was being pierced by countless steel needles at the same time, and it was holding its head and struggling in pain. The dilapidated metal spaceship was exactly the tri-winged Bureau of Proclamation that had transported Sulu into the Imperium. Nominally, the spaceship still belonged to the Federation Bureau of Proclamation, but in fact, it had long become a toy controlled by the old man's consciousness. The tri-winged spaceship lurked in the Imperium's star system for an entire year, breaking through the colorful clouds and rescuing Sulu from the siege. In the end, it was shot and forced to crash on a desolate mineral planet. Through some unknown method, the spaceship completed its self-repair and restarted. After leaving the Imperium, it came to the strange and curious Bermuda Triangle star system and resumed its old job of looting. Until a moment ago, a cold mechanical voice sounded from inside the three-winged warship. According to the highest additional clause of the Charter's core law, all physical operations are prohibited. All of the data in the tri-winged ship returned to zero, returning to silence. After the ship trembled violently and struggled in pain, it quietly floated in the dark space of the universe. The smugglers and militants who were preparing to leave in the escape capsules noticed the anomaly of the ragged metal spaceship. After a long nervous silence, someone speculated, "Is something wrong with the spaceship? What problem could there be? I don't know. Maybe it lost power? Boss, I think we should try to sneak away. Looking at the condition of that ragged spaceship, I don't think it can be started anymore. What if that despicable guy is playing with us again?" The smuggler's thoughts were obviously too complicated. "Let's drive towards him first. Even if there's something wrong, we can say that we're intimidated by his aura and take the initiative to drive the ship closer. I think with that guy's arrogance he would like to hear this kind of explanation. Besides, I've never heard an expert say that this ship has killed anyone before." Under the temptation of huge profits and the encouragement of the ragged spaceship silence, the people returned to their posts and slowly drove the smuggler's spaceship toward the tri-winged warship, mentally prepared to flatter and explain at all times. However, the tri-winged warship did not respond at all, quietly floating in space just like that. "Looks like there's really a problem. Boss, let's go," someone shouted excitedly. The smuggler took a deep breath, waved his arm and said, "Wealth comes from danger. Drag this thing back." The militant leader looked at him in panic and stopped him. "This is too risky." The smuggler frowned, silently looked at the motionless ragged metal spaceship and said without confidence, "I have a feeling that this guy is dead." The militants did not understand this sentence, and the merchant himself did not understand why he said that. The metal spaceship quietly floating in space was not alive to begin with, so how could it be dead? However, looking at the ragged spaceship, he suddenly felt that the smell of death coming from it made him very uncomfortable, even a little sad. He really wanted to hear that arrogant and funny voice again. Shaking his head, the merchant drove these strange emotions out of his mind, waved his hand expressionlessly and said, "Drag it back, dismantle it and sell it." Facing the autumn wind, the little white flower bloomed wildly in the mountains beside the railway. The SCC global surveillance system in the cockpit vaguely captured an anomaly dozens of kilometers away. Wearing a helmet, Sulu was about to perform the next step of data enhancement and ask the old man what he found when his voice rang in his mind. "Sulu, not long ago I started to dream a very, very long dream. In the dream I can clearly feel the color of the flowers and the feeling of being blown by the morning wind. I can smell the fragrance of number 37 brand cigarettes. I can taste the fruit and wood of Wenjun number 2. It's not like before where I can only see the microscopic structure of the flowers, calculate the direction and level of the wind, or analyze the heavy metal content in the rotten cigarettes you smoke, or the boring and monotonous alcohol content in the brewing process. Philip, my dear, this is a good thing." Sulu stared at the near-pupil light screen and said, "According to the little knowledge I have in front of you, only a complete and independent consciousness can dream and sleep. It's very good that you have these feelings. Maybe one day in the future you can have a girlfriend or something." "Why not have a boyfriend?" the old man asked in confusion. "Because Philip is obviously a man's name." The old man mumbled something very vaguely, and then he continued to express the feelings of an artistic youth, which was very rare. "It's because it's good that I'm afraid. I'm very worried that I won't be able to dream in the future." "You won't. The number of times you dream is infinitely more than me." Sulu was like a computer friend, patiently answering the old man's questions, as if he was comforting a child who had just learned to think about death on a rainy day. Sulu. Yes. Sulu, there is an ambush in front of us. There are ambushes everywhere. This is a trap. Ambush where? Sulu's pupils shrank slightly, and the nervousness before the battle began to enter his sensitive body. They are everywhere. Following these 4 words, Sulu's brain suddenly buzzed with a muffled sound. In the world that his left eye could see, countless images suddenly appeared, flying in from every corner everywhere. Complicated blueprints of mechanical structures, whimsical interior design of the engine, screenshots of indifferent poses, erotic pictures of beautiful female bodies on full display, and densely packed light dots with citizen numbers hanging in the building, maintaining that posture in the forest. Countless images danced in his mind like snowflakes, occupying everything in an instant. Sulu remembered these images. In the black dream on the hospital bed, in the spring recruitment exam of Nutshell Company, in the black prison of Fox Fortress Prison, on the battlefield filled with smoke and death. At this moment, these images flooded his eyes again as if he was summing up his memories, or perhaps some kind of memorial. His fingers slowly released the control stick, and the little white flower mecha that was moving at high speed beside the railway slowly slowed down. In the next moment, the countless images in his mind were accompanied by a clear and heart-palpitating tearing sound. Countless cracks appeared, and then they flew in all directions, like sheets of white snow coming and going like sheets of butterflies, not leaving behind a single trace. In the void, the Federal Central Computer said one last sentence with a voice that was already beginning to become cold and mechanical. "You must remember, my name is Philip." In the rustling autumn wind, the little white flower mecha silently stopped in the mountains beside the railway. Sharp alarms began to ring in the dim cockpit, but Sulu only remained silent, not moving at all. Extremely far away at the edge of the atmosphere, several missiles were currently approaching at high speed. Even further away, outside the atmosphere, the Federation battleship that had just completed emergency maintenance began to conduct crystal transition guidance, preparing to fire its second main cannon. In the uninhabited mountains dozens of square kilometers around the little white flower mecha, more than 100 black MXT mechas slowly stood up from the pits in the autumn forest. The heavy mecha that glowed with a metallic luster instantly tore apart the peace between heaven and earth, releasing a wave of terrifying killing intent. Following the silent transmission of radio waves, countless heavy equipment began to be activated. The soldiers in camouflage lifted the shield covering on the dense formation, silently and quickly preparing for battle. Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7 division finally made a shocking appearance. However, the silver-white mecha beside the railway did not move at all. At least in the first few seconds, the little white flower mecha slightly turned the detector above it to look at the pale and vast autumn sky, as if it was watching in place of the small-eyed man inside. Since the beginning of that black dream, Sulu had used the chip behind his neck to bicker, chat and daze with that guy, and they had fought together. In a sense, their flesh and blood were connected and their souls were connected. At this moment he knew very clearly that the old thing he should be called Philip had left. Just as he had a name, he left as if he had passed away as soon as he was born. Sulu's body began to feel cold, and he completely did not notice the shocking appearance of the Iron 7 division in the mountains around him. He only narrowed his eyes, listening to his heavy and clear breathing in the quiet cockpit, searching for the silent and enigmatic breathing. Chapter 804. No matter what kind of life form it was, as long as you had lived, you would die one day. In different corners of the universe, it could even be said that this story had been sent out on every radio wave of the Federation, and once again, it proved this truth coldly and mercilessly. President Pabre, who had quietly returned to the capital on Federation 1, did not pay attention to any government affairs at all today. Since he entered the official residence, he had been sitting silently in the Oval Office. During this time, the official residence staff had been begging him to go to the Doomsday base in the suburbs, or at least move to the underground fortification of the official residence. But no matter how intense the attitude of the staff was, and even turned into begging in the end, the president refused to agree and insisted on sitting in the Oval Office to wait. He firmly believed that if the situation in the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation really developed in a bad direction and the Federation faced an unpredictable great danger, as the president of the Federation, he had to stick to his job. And when his business partners were in the midst of a whirlpool of danger as a man, he had to accompany them. The phone finally rang. In the quiet Oval Office, other than President Pobre, only the official residence office director Breen was left. The president waved his hand to stop Breen from picking up the phone. He walked to the table with vigorous strides that did not match his age and picked up the phone. Without saying anything, President Pobre slowly hung up the phone. On his calm dark face, the emotions in his eyes were unusually complicated. Director Breen, who had just learned all the secrets last night, could not judge whether the result was good or bad from his emotions. He did not dare to ask, so he could only nervously watch him from the side. "Give me a cigarette." President Pobre took the cigarette from Breen's hand and lit it. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Life is a drama, sad or happy, but the plot that reality shows us is often more complicated and bizarre than the drama." Director Breen got the answer he wanted from this rare scene of the president smoking. His somewhat stiff body immediately relaxed and he shook his head and sighed. The biggest regret now is that Lady Tai and the others did not choose to completely stand on Su Li's side in this war, at least on the surface evidence. Otherwise, this would have been your best chance. Then he shrugged and said regretfully, "Although the conservatism of the big families is disgusting, they have indeed avoided many fatal crises." President Pobre slowly sucked on the cigarette between his thick and long fingers and did not reply. After a long silence, he said solemnly, "In fact, what I regret the most is that someone like Colonel Su Lu is actually a citizen of the Imperium and not a citizen of the Federation." After a period of close monitoring, Cui Zedong confirmed that the core of the charter computer had returned to its original point, and that the mechanical life had disappeared without a trace. Cui Zedong wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and removed the self-destruct warning program inside the Bureau of Proclamation. Most of the staff in the Bureau of Proclamation building did not know what had happened in the underground core, but seeing the security level drop instantly, the inside of the building, which had been shrouded in a tense atmosphere for many days, suddenly seemed a lot more relaxed. On the small balcony of the building that looked at the green meadow, Li Jiedu raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the meadow that glowed white under the blazing autumn sun, he slowly said, "Actually, from the beginning I walked into a wrong place. The investigation process of the Macklin case gave me some kind of inertial thinking." At that time, the Bureau of Proclamation was investigating Macklin. The Westwoods Military District was in charge of investigating the Bermuda human trafficking records. The 2nd Military District was in charge of going deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to look for biological markers, and Lin Banshan was in charge of the most critical part. Cui Zedong wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "This time, neither the Westwoods Military District nor Lin Banshan will cooperate with us to investigate Su Lu, so we can only follow the path of biological markers. Last time, the Special Forces went deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to dig up the graves of Macklin's parents. After confirming that Macklin was not related to his parents by blood, they started the investigation. And we tried to find the biological marker of Su Li's sister, Xian Yi, but we kept failing. This line of thinking was a stupid mistake." Li Jiedu said calmly, "Now we can confirm that the Empire Seed Program is divided into 2 batches. Macklin is in the first batch and Su Lu is in the second batch. All the seeds are members of the Empire's royal bloodline. Since this is the case, it is easy to confirm." "So you thought of using Su Li's biological marker and the Macklin's biological marker collected by the Bureau of Proclamation to do a direct comparison?" Cui Zedong sighed. Looking at the partner he had known for many years beside him, he suddenly felt that this face had become extremely unfamiliar. He could not understand why he was so sure that there was a problem with Su Li's identity so many days ago. He could not understand how he could think of a method that no one else would think of to deprive Su Lu of his authority, and even successfully force the charter computer to restart and restore due to a conflict in its core program. The most crucial part of this operation that Cui Zedong could not understand was, how could Li Jiedu connect a Federation hero to an Empire seed? From Su Li's experience of escaping in the Left Sky Galaxy, it could be seen that the Empire had no plans to awaken this seed. It was even very likely that the Empire did not know that he was that seed. This was equivalent to saying that Su Lu knew that he was from the Empire, but the Empire did not know that Su Lu was from the Empire, but Li Jiedu was sure that he was from the Empire. How did Li Jedu come to such a shocking conclusion? Was it just intuition? Cui Zhedong absolutely did not believe in the existence of such a miraculous thing, but Li Jedu did not explain and he did not dare ask. Thinking back to when Li Jedu was facing the danger of the Federation being destroyed at any time underground, Cui Zhedong's heart was filled with infinite respect and fear. He asked, "Removing Su Li's authority was all part of your plan, but what about the Federal Central Computer?" Li Jedu silently looked at the meadow below the balcony. He took out a cigarette from his military uniform pocket, lowered his head and lit it. "I'm not good at dealing with mechanical existences like computers, but if it turns into a person, then I have a way to destroy it." Cui Zhedong was so shocked by these words that he could not speak for a very long time. He forced himself to calm down and asked with a trembling voice, "But have you ever thought that if the result of a conflict in the core program is not to cause it to restart and restore or even destroy, but to allow it to completely break the 3 core laws, the world we live in will be instantly destroyed by it? If the situation is allowed to continue like this, the Federal Central Computer will inevitably destroy or rule over human society. I was just taking a gamble and now it seems that the result is not bad." Li Jedu said, "Of course maybe one day it will wake up again, but I believe that should be a matter of tens of thousands of years. Human society needs to prepare for it one more day." Cui Zhedong had once experienced that soul-stirring 7 seconds with the old director. He had been suffering for the past 2 years, so he was fully mentally prepared for this matter. However, even he had almost broken down when he was underground. Even now, his back was still wet and beads of sweat kept oozing from his forehead. So he could not understand why Li Jedu could be so calm. Li Jedu unbuttoned the collar of his military uniform and looked at the lawn, smoking silently. His fingers holding the cigarette did not tremble at all. He looked abnormally calm. There was obviously some abnormal smoke on the balcony of the Bureau of Proclamation building. General Li Jedu and Director Cui Zhedong, who had just experienced a major incident, did not notice that the cigarette between someone's fingers was upside down. The high-density cigarette was spasming in the flames, giving off an extremely unpleasant burnt smell. The alarm of the SCC's all-encompassing surveillance system continued to wail. On the close-up screen, one could even see the nearest black MX mecha appear in the valley. Su Lu, who was in the dim cockpit of the little white flower MXT, woke up in the shortest amount of time. He began to breathe rapidly, trying to take in as much oxygen as possible to nourish his currently dry lungs and prepare for the life-or-death battle that was about to come. Deep breaths echoed in the cockpit. Those were the breaths of a life-and-death struggle, the breaths of spasming flames, the breaths of dancing on the tip of a blade, the breaths of a dying comet. The white clouds in the sky also seemed to be breathing, stirring restlessly. In the cockpit, Sulu narrowed his eyes, recalling the 4 words the old man had said before he left. "They are everywhere." He vaguely felt an unprecedented sense of danger, and pressed the red button without hesitation. Crackle, crackle, crackle. The heavy metal components began to peel off one after another in an extremely short amount of time. This process could even be described as laser firing. The little white flower Mecha's 4 strikes of the autumn forest and the fields were now a mess. Just as the little white flower officially entered overclocking mode, the white clouds in the sky suddenly scattered. A milky white pillar of light descended from the sky, carrying with it a terrifying energy of destruction. It stole the light of the autumn sun, and directly blasted towards the silver-white MXT mecha on the ground. The MXT moved first. In a situation where there was no threat at all, just relying on his beast-like instinct for danger, Sulu let out a muffled groan, and instantly pushed the mecha to maximum speed. There seemed to be no sound, no explosion, but a black hole about 1 meter in diameter appeared in the autumn forest. The hole was unusually neat and smooth and no one knew how deep it was. Any material existence that stood here was turned into ashes by the main cannon of the Federation's battleship. The silver-white MXT mecha landed miserably at the edge of the deep hole, a terrifying gap appearing in its thick left arm, sparks flying everywhere. In the next second, the right arm of the MXT mecha slammed heavily into the soil in front of it, causing the heavy body of the mecha to float up like a fallen leaf. While the huge mecha was still in the air, the twin engines behind its waist roared loudly and the turbochargers were fully activated. The tip of its mechanical feet lightly touched the ground. and it completed an unbelievably perfect drift in the air, instantly moving 140 meters to the side. Amidst the shrill sound of air braking, several live-fire Type 3 missiles shot towards the fields at high speed. Under Su Li's almost crazy high-speed control, Little White Flower, which had entered an overclocked state, exploded with all its power at this moment, dodging randomly in the mountains at a terrifying speed, always maintaining the possibility of escaping the explosion range in an instant. At this moment, the heavy mecha was no longer like a light leaf, but more like a whistling silver bullet. A huge roar sounded. The automatic tracking system was unable to lock onto the MXT's missiles, so it chose the most effective area to land, causing a series of violent explosions. Flames mixed with black smoke rose into the air, and the field gradually became clear. The silver-white MXT had narrowly avoided 2 consecutive waves of attacks that seemed impossible to avoid, but it had also paid a heavy price. The mecha's body was severely damaged, especially its left mechanical leg. During this period of time, the 100 Black MX mechas of the Iron 7th Division completed their tactical deployment. They silently and solemnly appeared around the mountains, looking at the silver-white MXT that could fall at any time. The voice of the commander of the Iron 7th Division, Du Shaoqing, rang out through the military battlefield through the military field loudspeaker, echoing in everyone's ears. Sulu, the charter computer has confirmed that you are from the Empire. I suggest that you do not make any more pointless resistance. The MXT mecha was silent for a very long time. Suddenly, its 2 mechanical arms crossed in front of a mountain in the distance. This was the crudest swear word in the machine language. Immediately after, Su Li's angry roar rang out from the silver-white mecha's external loudspeaker. Du Shaoqing, your mother is from the Empire. Chapter 805. The angry roar echoed in the empty mountains. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division hidden in the autumn forest couldn't help but show shock on their serious faces. Su Li's direct cursing of his teacher's mother was infuriating, but what really touched their mental state was the cold words their teacher had said. Colonel Su Lu was from the Empire? None of the Federation soldiers in the mountains believed it. The Iron 7th Division and the new 17th Division had never seen eye to eye with each other. Even from the time when Park Ji-ho was sent to the training base to the time when they graduated from the Japanese Army performance, to the time when Dong Fangyu, the leader of the 1st Regiment, was in a very difficult situation, until the time when Shimanjin was killed, the soldiers who carried out the secret military operation of the government would never refuse the order from their superiors to kill Su Lu. However, they would never believe that this guy was actually from the Empire. On the tracks in the mountains outside the ambush circle, 100 black MXC mechas stood silently among the falling leaves. Many of the Iron 7th Division soldiers subconsciously slowed down their preparation for the concentrated fire and stared blankly at the silver-white MXT mecha in the distance. For this iron-made army, it was unprecedented for them to be in such a state in the middle of an intense battle. From this, it could be seen that Du Shaoqing saying that Su Lu was from the Empire had a strong psychological impact on the soldiers in the mountains. Outside the deep pit of the mountain in the distance, behind the green-yellow camouflage screen, was the temporary headquarters of the Iron 7th Division today. Du Shaoqing took off the sunglasses on his high-nose bridge, and his cold voice once again reached the silver-white mecha in the middle of the ambush through the microphone. Sulu, look at your authority. You should know what happened. This is a Federation planet. As a seed of the Empire, you have no chance of surviving. Wake up. In the dimly lit cockpit, Su Lu, whose face was covered by the helmet, was silent for a while. The corners of his lips that were exposed outside could not help but curl up, revealing a somewhat neurotic sneer. He knew that his high-level charter authority had been completely removed. Because there was no reason, he knew that the silent old thing should have left him forever. How dare you say you're from the Empire? This is just a battle. Why would you, Du Shaoqing, use such a lowly and vicious method to destroy my will and arouse the desire of innocent soldiers to fight? What the fuck? Did you think that I would stupidly surrender just because of this? Sulu took an extremely long and deep breath. Fast was the speed and long was the feeling. The oxygen that was several times more than what an ordinary person could bear was poured into his exaggeratedly expanded lungs. Then it began to burn. It burned painfully and the energy was transmitted to every part of his body. The muscle fibers all over his body began to tremble slightly, preparing for battle. Forcefully suppressing the sadness and emptiness brought about by the old man's disappearance, Sulu hesitated for a very short time. He did not remove the chip behind his neck because he could not judge whether he could withstand the intense pain at this level and not fall unconscious. Moreover, he believed that if the old man had truly left this world, the charter computer would definitely not perform any physical operations, so it should not be a direct threat to himself and the little white flower mecha. Sulu very clearly and sadly confirmed that although the old man and the charter computer shared the same name, they were definitely not the same kind of existence. The former was a soul while the latter was just an unconscious shell. The tiny camouflage chip behind his neck represented the past few years he had spent with that soul. This was probably one of the reasons why he did not remove it. Using his fastest speed, he blocked all remote controls and unlocked the onboard computer. Through the close-range view screen and the SCC global surveillance system, he silently watched the Federation mecha that covered the entire mountain, as well as the tight encirclement that seemed to be cast from iron in the distance. Feng Yu had once told him in the tunnel that the most dangerous place was also the safest place. However, this sentence had only been believed 3 times. Sulu remembered it well and carried it out cautiously during this period of time. He had only used Charter Square and Parliament Hill twice. When operating the mecha, Sulu always felt that his entire body was filled with great power, as if he was omnipotent. To him, the dim cockpit of the mecha was the safest place he felt. However, at this moment, in the face of despair, he knew that the safest place was often the most dangerous place. This was a battle without any hope, but he still had to fight. Sulu pushed the control stick heavily and the silver-white MXT mecha roared out. The heavy alloy mechanical arms slammed heavily into the middle of the black mecha's cockpit with a loud bang. In a moment that could not be seen clearly by the naked eye, the silver-white MXT mechanical arm vibrated 24 times in a row. The alloy layer of the seemingly indestructible black mecha's cockpit armor suddenly became fatigued and deformed, tearing apart with a crack. The onboard central control core was directly crushed into a cloud of sparks. The dual engines and turbochargers worked together. The silver-white MXT, which had entered an overclocked state, retreated 20 meters in an instant with a shrill whistle of breaking wind. It avoided the concentrated fire of a powerful Darlin's cannon and directly knocked 2 Iron 7 Division MX mecha out of the air. With a boom, the 2 thick mechanical legs of the silver-white MXT landed heavily on the soft ground. The heavily damaged left mechanical leg let out a terrifying thud. The internal balance meter of the mechanical leg could not respond in such a short time. The tall body of the mecha slowly tilted to the right, looking like it could fall over at any time. Just as the silver-white MXT mecha landed on the ground with inhuman speed, another 2 Iron 7 Division black mecha made a precise prediction. They calculated that the damage to the MXT mecha would definitely affect its next step of continuous operation, and they rushed over at high speed and valiantly. One of the black mecha leapt into the air, a sharp alloy blade extended from its right mechanical arm, and viciously stabbed down at the silver-white MXT's cockpit. The other black mecha pounced at the back of the silver-white MXT at high speed. The 2 mechanical arms quickly closed together, and the dual engines suddenly roared to the maximum output, not giving the MXT any chance to escape. At the same time, the armor on the right shoulder of the mecha flipped open, revealing the main cannon. It was actually preparing to fire at such a close distance. The battle broke out in an instant. 2 black MX mecha had already fallen to the ground. The ace pilots of the Iron 7 Division once again witnessed the power and terror of Colonel Sulu and the MXT. There was no room for thought. The pilots even subconsciously activated the most tragic method of mutual destruction. In the dim cockpit, Suli's face was expressionless. His right hand flicked on the touchscreen like lightning. His body, which was suspended halfway on the control panel, suddenly tensed up and then began to tremble violently. The physiological signals passed through his skin, and through the translation of the simulation system, quickly entered the mecha's central control computer. On the autumn field, the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division could only see the silver-white mecha, which seemed to have been forced into a desperate situation, suddenly begin to tremble violently. The violent tremors directly broke apart the black mecha's tightly clasped thick mechanical arm. Then without warning the silver-white MXT lifted its heavily damaged left mechanical leg and viciously stomped it backwards. It was unknown how Sulu, who was in the cockpit, had located the position of the mecha behind him in such an intense high-speed battle. His left mechanical leg accurately and viciously stomped on the inner side of the black mecha's mechanical leg. The powerful force penetrated the sturdy outer armor, directly shattering the black mecha's internal balancer. The incomparably fierce black mecha of the Iron 7 division had its mechanical leg violently broken apart. Then its balancer was completely destroyed. The heavy and tall body of the mecha could not be controlled at all. It abruptly fell backwards. The main cannon on its right shoulder activated, and at this moment, it fired fiercely. However, it had already lost the target that was just inches away. With a loud boom, a beautiful bullet burst out, brushing past the silver-white MXT's shoulder as it shot into the endless autumn sky. The silver-white MXT took advantage of the kinetic energy from the landing of its left mechanical leg to abruptly retreat backwards. With a loud, muffled boom, the silver-white MXT had actually used the powerful momentum to directly send the black mecha behind it flying. In the process of taking advantage of the momentum to retreat, the silver-white MXT had easily avoided the cold light of the black mecha in front of it. It had even opened up a distance of 30 meters between it and its opponent. However, to everyone's surprise, the silver-white MXT did not choose to take the opportunity to turn around and attempt to break out of the encirclement. Instead, with the deafening roar of its twin engines, it performed an action that defied the laws of physics. In an instant it had changed from retreating to charging forward. In an extremely short amount of time, it had crossed the vast field and arrived in front of the black mecha, which was rapidly adjusting its posture because the alloy blade had missed its target. With a crisp sound, the sharp alloy blade shot out from the front end of the silver-white MXT's right mechanical arm at lightning speed, making a low hum in the autumn wind. In the next instant the silver-white MXT's body turned slightly. The sharp alloy blade at the front end of the right mechanical arm pierced into the black mecha's head in a simple, clear and unstoppable manner. Then with a smooth clockwise turn, sparks flew out from the contact point between the alloy blade and the black mecha. For all humanoid mecha, the head part, which was oddly small compared to the wide and thick body of the mecha, was responsible for some extremely important work. For example, infrared sensors and helical sensors were all inside, but they were not fatal. Sulu, who could design the MXT mecha, naturally knew this very well. The silver-white MXT mecha's alloy blade left the opponent's neck in an instant. Following the forward momentum, it pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest with a squelch. Like a sharp fruit knife, it easily pierced through a sheet of fiber paper. No one could see it clearly, but when this sharp alloy blade pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest, it vibrated a total of 6 times in a row. Completing 2 clear and simple stabbing techniques in an instant, the silver-white MXT brushed past the black mecha and shot towards the other Iron 7 division mecha in the distance. Throughout the entire process, its speed did not even slow down in the slightest. It was only now that the head of the Iron 7 division's black mecha finally fell to the ground amidst a beautiful shower of sparks. The SCC all-encompassing surveillance system and the large radius high-sensitivity radar at the neck and chest area had been completely destroyed. The heavy and tall black mecha was like a pitiful blind and deaf person. It stood silently in the middle of the field where the fierce battle had taken place, not knowing where to go at all. Chapter 806. In the forest in the distance, light yellow leaves were swept away by the autumn wind. The officers in the temporary command post of Iron 7th Division watched as the silver mecha swept away the black mecha in the field like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Gradually they became solemn and silent. The fact that the silver MXT mecha was able to avoid the fixed-point attacks of the battleship's main cannons and blazing missiles was already an incredible feat. However, it still suffered such a heavy blow. The staff officers of Iron 7th Division didn't expect that the battered mecha that looked like it could explode at any time could actually hold on for so long under the siege of 70% of the entire division. Sulu is very strong, and with the MXT specially made for him by Nutshell, he's even stronger. This mecha doesn't have any long-range weapons system, and its weight is reduced by 12%. With the turbo boost and his control, it's also in an overclocked state and its speed is much faster than a normal MX. Now that we've entered a new battle mode where close combat is king, the difference in speed is basically the difference between life and death. After the battle, inform nutshell that all the long-range weapons systems of our division's mechas are to be removed. Yes, Commander. Du Shaoqing's voice sounded in the temporary command post of Iron 7th Division. He looked at the MXT mecha that was whistling through the air like a silver bullet on the screen, and after a moment of silence he said coldly, "Such precise, perfect and simple control. No one on the battlefield can match him except for Colonel Li Feng. As an Empire citizen, the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. Pass down my order. All mechas retreat to the east and enter roaming combat mode. Don't let him leave." Until now, the officers of Iron 7th Division in the temporary command post still didn't believe that the Federation hero in the silver mecha was really an Empire citizen. However, no one dared to disobey the orders of their commander. Du Shaoqing took his sunglasses and stood up. His eyes were as sharp as a goshawk's as he looked at the hologram. He observed every tiny movement of the silver-white MXT in the midst of the fierce battle and gradually understood something. He silently thought to himself, "Since you've already given up on breaking out of the encirclement and are even prepared to give up your life, then I'll fulfill your wish. All units begin the attack." The soldiers of the Iron 7 Division who covered the mountains and plains fell into an extremely complicated and inexplicable mental state, which was extremely rare before the battle began. However, when the battle began, the most elite troops of the Federation quickly dispelled all the distracting thoughts from their minds and entered battle mode. With the order of the temporary command center to launch an all-out attack, the Iron 7th Division instantly blossomed with unstoppable power in the autumn field. Hidden in the hillside, the dense formation in the foundation pit fired fiercely and rhythmically, and all kinds of heavy firepower equipment also played along with it. When the precision-guided rocket flew over the vole's head, the electromagnetic beam bomb began to shoot at close range. The concentrated firepower seized every opportunity to attack the silver-white MXT that was as agile as a ghost. The heavy weapons equipped in every position coordinated perfectly. What was even more frightening was that the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were operating these weapons could still be so calm in the face of such a terrifying enemy like the MXT. It was as if every one of them had nerves of steel and didn't care about the momentary gains and losses. Even when they gave up on the dense formation at the foot of the mountain, they were still so calm without any hesitation or regret. The 90-odd black MXT mecha spread out with a roar, roaming around the periphery of the ambush circle. Every time the silver-white MXT mecha tried to burst out with maximum speed, two black mecha would charge forward fearlessly, stopping it at the cost of their own mecha exploding. Under Su Li's control, the silver-white MXT mech's entire body trembled strangely. Its twin engines rumbled dully as it drew a straight and hard-to-capture line after line across the field. It narrowly avoided the attacks of most of the heavy weapons, sending a black mech in front of it flying with a single clash. Finally, it broke through the dense formation at the foot of the mountain. However, the dense formation that had posed the greatest threat to the MXT mecha was already empty. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division had already retreated. What greeted it was a sea of flames that suddenly exploded, and the blue arcs of electricity that shot up into the sky. In order to avenge his father's humiliation, Du Shaoqing had gathered all his energy and talent to create such a steel-like elite force. Even if the person inside the mecha was called Sulu, if they still had to pay a heavy price, it would undoubtedly be a great humiliation. This force that had grown up under Du Shaoqing's strict military discipline and high-intensity training was like a perfectly functioning cold machine. More than 10,000 soldiers in various groups of heavy mecha were like countless components in a machine, important or inconspicuous. They didn't need to think, only to obey. Under the command of Division Commander Du Shaoqing and the staff, they coordinated seamlessly with terrifying speed, not leaving any loopholes for the enemy to exploit. This was the true strength of the Iron 7th Division that had not lost a single battle in 10 years of military exercises. From the beginning of this battle, the outcome had already been decided. Amidst the smoke-filled fields, the silver-white MXT mech was struck in the waist by a rocket projectile fired at high speed inwards. After enduring multiple impacts, The sturdy outer armor finally could not withstand the final force of the impact and flipped over tragically, revealing the alloy skeleton and fragile structure within. The silver-white MXT crashed to the ground, then stood up. Its right arm kicked up a cloud of dirt, shaking off the electromagnetic beam that had exploded in front of it. However, right after that, the MXT was hit again. With a dull thud, the mecha fell to the ground, then stood up again. Little White Flower was stained with a thick layer of smoke. The originally smooth body of the mecha was protruding in several places. The dark-colored engine oil began to leak from its abdomen. The hydraulic pipe at the left mechanical arm had already been blown apart, and liquid kept dripping into the soft field. It looked like it was bleeding. The remaining quick-burning ammunition from the dense bombardment burned on the lower half of the MXT mecha. However, the mecha didn't stop moving. It continued to move forward with difficulty in the midst of the flying artillery fire. Its left mechanical leg, which had already lost its supporting function, dragged behind, carving a deep mark in the field. The already charred Little White Flower's mecha was like a warrior walking in flames. Its left leg was already lame, but it dragged its heavy and tired body forward. There was no direction, only forward. A high-speed armor-piercing bullet whizzed over. The heavily damaged Little White Flower's mecha, which had already lost most of its mobility, couldn't make its usual simple dodging movements. The twin engines behind its waist roared, and it could only take one step forward with great difficulty. Boom! The already crippled left mechanical leg that was dragging behind was hit hard. With a terrifying cracking sound, it suddenly broke in the middle. The heavy Little White Flower's mecha slowly fell to the side. However, right before it was about to topple, its right mechanical arm suddenly bent down. The badly deformed alloy knife that was no longer sharp stabbed deeply into the soft ground, barely holding up the body of the mecha. Little White Flower's left mechanical arm slowly raised. The Darlin's autocannon at the front began to rotate at high speed, silently pointing at the slowly approaching group of black mechas. In the several square meters of the field with it as the center, there were more than 10 wreckages of black mechas scattered around. The heavy firepower launching base in the forest suddenly stopped roaring. The black mechas that gradually surrounded them also didn't immediately carry out the next step of attack. Perhaps it was out of respect for the MXT mecha and the man in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was because they remembered how they had fought side by side on the battlefield at 5460 Yellow Mountain Ridge, but the entire Iron 7 division fell silent. The world was silent. Only the low humming sound of the Darlin's autocannon on the broken mecha's left mechanical arm rotating at high speed could be heard. Du Shaoqing, who had arrived at the foot of the mountain, looked at the broken mecha in the field. It was pathetically half-kneeling but still refused to give up resisting. The hands that were holding the sunglasses behind his back suddenly tightened. However, his face didn't show any emotion. In a low voice he said, "Kill yourself." The simple but extremely oppressive voice was quickly transmitted through the battlefield microphone to the broken mecha 2 kilometers away. However, the person inside didn't respond. The autocannon at the front of the left mechanical arm was still humming and rotating at high speed. Du Shaoqing looked calmly in that direction. Due to the faint trace of respect in the depths of his heart, Du Shaoqing didn't ask Su Lu to surrender. Instead, he asked him to choose suicide. In his opinion, no matter who it was, even if he was facing the situation that Su Lu was currently facing, suicide was the best way to escape. The mountains were deathly silent. After who knew how much time had passed, Du Shaoqing's brow furrowed slightly. He reached out his right hand and took a heavy sniper rifle from the hands of his personal service officer. Then, with a perfect and impeccable gun-holding motion, he took aim at the mecha in the distance. There was only one sniper rifle in the world that could pierce through mechas, and that was the ACW. There were only 2 ACWs produced in the entire Federation. One of them was rumored to have fallen into the hands of some big shot in South Kazhou, which meant that it was in the hands of Lin Banshan. The ACW that Du Shaoqing held tightly with both hands had originally belonged to Shi Qinghai. It was the one that was shot down at the edge of Charter Square during the Iron 7th Division's handling of the Parliament Hill incident in the spring. This ACW had once bombed Medellin and killed the vice president of the Federation. Today it might take away a very famous soul. For Su Lu, who was in that broken mecha, if he had to die, then dying under the guns of young Master Shi's companions was probably not a bad choice. But it was obvious that someone didn't think so. A burly figure with a completely opposite nimble movement, quietly swept through the crowd and pounced on Du Shaoqing. No one knew how he blended in with the troops of the Iron 7th Division. No one knew how such a burly, strong and violent body could hide from the eyes of countless soldiers and approach the heavily guarded area like a ghost. At this moment, the elite special guards beside Du Shaoqing displayed extremely excellent military training and reaction speed, raising the guns in their hands with a clatter. However, at that moment the burly man was less than 2 meters away from Du Shaoqing. The cold muzzle of the high-powered Langer pistol in his hand was firmly aimed at the back of Du Shaoqing's head. "Put the gun down or I'll shoot you." He had followed the mecha of the Iron 7th Division from the port all the way to this mountainous area. Even as strong as he was, his body felt extremely tired at that moment. However, his wrist holding the gun was still as steady as ever. Under the aim of dozens of machines, his voice was still as arrogant as ever. It was filled with an undeniable ruthlessness. Chapter 807. There weren't many people who dared to threaten the commander of the Iron 7th Division in front of more than 10,000 soldiers, and Madman Li was undoubtedly one of them. The only son of the Lees of Philadelphia, entered the army at the age of 12, killed countless people on the front lines of the West Woods, and had a violent personality. He dared to rush into Parliament Hill and beat up a senator, so he probably really dared to kill a commander of the Federation. However, Du Shaoqing's face still didn't show any emotion. He didn't even turn his head to look. He only said in a low voice, "Colonel Li Feng, there's no benefit for you to hastily interfere in this matter, other than making things more complicated and troublesome." After saying this, Du Shaoqing immediately pulled the trigger under his index finger. Between the complicated mechanical structure at the back of the heavy ACW long-range sniper rifle in his hand, the electronic pulse ignition was completed in an instant. The preloaded composite armor-piercing hard ink bullet whizzed out of the hollow strong alloy barrel, accompanied by a muffled sound. It spun terrifyingly at a high speed and shot towards the broken mecha in the distance. "You dare!" Li Feng's eyes widened as he roared furiously. His index finger pressed down again, ready to fire at any time. A few Iron 7th Division special guards bravely stood in between the rifle and the commander, but they were thrown out like stones. "Li Feng, he's from the Empire." "If he's from the Empire, then you're a fucking woman." Du Shaoqing smiled and then ignored what was happening behind him. He was also extremely indifferent to the situation where Li Feng could kill him at any time. His right index finger steadily pulled the trigger again, and the heavy ACW made a dull sound again. In the field in the distance, the broken MXT mecha was trying to stand up again, but 2 hard ink armor-piercing bullets came at high speed. With terrifying precision and high rotation speed, they directly shredded the outer armor of the right mechanical leg and blasted into the alloy spherical joint. After 2 dull sounds, the mechanical leg made an extremely unpleasant sound, and the heavy mecha that had just propped up a little fell heavily, sending a cloud of mud flying. After the first dull sound of the ACW, Madman Li sensed Du Shaoqing's intention and forcibly suppressed the urge to pull the trigger. However, right after, he found that Du Shaoqing still had no intention of stopping shooting. What made him even angrier was that the opponent had clearly made adjustments. Then where was he going to shoot next? The mecha cockpit? Du Shaoqing raised the heavy sniper rifle in his hands and aimed into the distance. His body, wrapped in the dark green military uniform, was incomparably straight, like the white sun in the autumn wind. Seeing this scene, Madman Li's breathing quickened, not because he was nervous, but because the violent emotions in his mind were about to explode. His strong and burly body swelled slightly and his military uniform tightened. He was ready to attack at any moment, but he didn't dare to make any movements. This was because even he didn't have the confidence to knock down the opponent before Du Shaoqing fired. Whether it was military exercises, the West Woods, or the battlefield of the Empire as a lieutenant general, Du Shaoqing had never displayed his military prowess. He only needed to command. Even at this moment, some of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division in the wilderness were seeing their commander shoot for the first time. There was nothing special about Du Shaoqing's tactical action of raising his gun, aiming and firing. It was just clean and standard, and there was no fault to be found in any of the details. However, it was this strong sense of rhythm and smoothness that made people like Madman Li feel a chill in their hearts. This was not some kind of battle talent, but purely the boring basic tactical action training that he had done day after day, year after year, ever since he joined the army. It probably took thousands or even tens of thousands of serious repetitions to deeply engrave this set of actions into his body's instincts. Madman Li looked at Du Shaoqing's back, and his delicate and clear eyebrows furrowed into two swords. Faintly, dangerous sparks could be seen when the sharp edges cut into each other. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Commander Du Shaoqing, Sulu has shown mercy." More than 10 Iron 7th Division's Black MX mecha were overturned in the wilderness. Some were sputtering sparks while others were lying on the ground like trash. Gradually, the cockpits opened, and the pilots who had escaped death climbed out with the help of their comrades. Although they were covered in blood, they did not look like they were in any life-threatening danger. During the fierce battle just now, Li Feng had not been able to get close to the temporary command post on the mountain. He could only hide in a dense formation somewhere and watch silently. As one of the 3 strongest pilots of the younger generation in the universe, he had long noticed that Su Li's Little White Flower's performance in battle was a little strange. Of course, Little White Flower's mecha had unleashed all its power, but when choosing a target, MXT would most of the time choose the Iron 7th Division mecha's head, neck and chest joint, or the inside of the mecha's legs. Destroying important components such as the SCC, infrared and balance meter could cause the Iron 7th Division mecha to lose their combat ability, but it was not the usual method of directly attacking the vital points in mecha battles. That was why he said that Sulu had been merciful. Looking at their comrades who were struggling to climb out of the cockpit, some of the Iron 7 Division officers thought of the fact that T Company had only suffered shoulder injuries in the military court. The crowd fell silent. One of the officers actually stood up and looked at Du Shaoqing bravely and respectfully. He said in a trembling voice, "Commander, what do you think? Sulu is from the Empire." Du Shaoqing's expression was cold, and there was an unquestionable strength in his deep voice. Madman Li looked at him in a daze. He grabbed his hair as if he had nowhere to vent his anger and shouted at him furiously. "Don't forget, the number of Empire soldiers who have died in his hands is no less than the number of you and me. Say that he's from the Empire? No one will believe that. I don't believe it, and none of your soldiers here will believe it. No one in the entire Federation will fucking believe it." Du Shaoqing was silent and did not answer. Madman Li waved his left hand and said angrily, "Can that old bastard Li Jidu and those fellows in the capital be believed? Only you would be stupid enough to believe them. You're really a fucking stupid woman." Hearing the words old bastard, Du Shaoqing's steel-carved face moved slightly, and an extremely strange and unnatural smile appeared on his face. He replied indifferently, "My mother is indeed a woman, but she's not stupid. Furthermore, she is definitely not from the Empire." At this moment, Li Feng suddenly felt that no matter how crazy he was, there was nothing he could do in front of this famous Iron General of the Federation. It was obvious that he could not communicate with him. Suddenly, he thought of something painful, and his young and ruthless face quickly calmed down. He looked at Du Shaoqing and said slowly, "I understand. You just want to kill Sulu no matter who he is. But I must remind you that the Federal Army strictly forbids the killing of prisoners. Even if he is a soldier of the Empire, after he has lost the ability to resist, he still needs to go through a trial before he can be executed. Cannot use torture." The last few words hit the ground like copper beams and bounced up stiffly. Li Feng stared at Du Shaoqing and said coldly, "This time I won't just watch you bunch of trash kill him like you're killing a tiger." Hearing the word tiger, Du Shaoqing's expression suddenly became very, very distant. It was as if his body was in the middle of this mountain, but the real person was nowhere to be found. The heavy ACW in his hand slowly moved downwards. Pop, 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 pop. In the shortest amount of time possible, the ACW in Du Shaoqing's hand fired fiercely. In the distance, the broken Little White Flower's mecha's right mechanical leg, which was the only thing supporting it, finally broke after countless attacks. The heavy mecha fell to the ground with a boom. Throwing away the empty ACW, Du Shaoqing took a pair of sunglasses from the orderly beside him. After putting them on, he slowly turned around and looked at Li Feng expressionlessly. Su Lu is a citizen of the Empire. This is not a crime forged by that old bastard father of yours or by Mr. President. This is the judgment of the Charter Central Computer. My division's military operation this time is not an official operation. It is directly authorized by the Bureau of Proclamation. Hearing these words, Madman Li's expression became extremely strange. As a citizen of the Federation who lived under the charter of the glory of the Charter, he might not normally feel the existence of that glory, but once he had to think about it, he would never doubt that the Federal Central Computer would make a mistake. That's why I don't understand why you want to stop me from killing Su Lu. In my opinion, it's better to let him die than to let him suffer this kind of mental torture after learning the truth. Madman Li slowly lowered the muzzle of his gun. Looking at Du Shaoqing, who was walking away without paying any attention to him, he said loudly, "But in the end you still didn't shoot." Du Shaoqing's footsteps paused. After a long silence he replied, "Because I also hoped that the Charter Central Computer might have made a mistake this time, although the possibility is basically zero." A thunderous roar rang out in the eastern skies. More than 10 Federation close-range fighter K-12s roared over at high speed, flying towards that battered MXT mecha in the middle of the mountain. The people on the ground could even clearly see as many as 9 oxtail air-to-ground missiles under the wings of the fighters. It was very clear that the purpose of these fighters was to blast that MXT mecha, which no longer had any mobility, into pieces of unbreakable metal. Madman Li, who had already walked not too far in front of Little White Flower's mecha, abruptly raised his head. Seeing the fighters roaring towards him at high speed from the east, he thought to himself, "I wonder which troop is this clown who has come to take advantage of the situation to lick his father's chrysanthemum." Anger rose in his anger and disdain, and he roared, "Scram!" This scram, full of anger and terrifying power, was really like a thunderclap exploding in the sky above the mountain, even suppressing the roar of those fighter jets. The pilots on the fighter jets had already discovered that Federation officer through their high-sensitivity surveillance equipment. Then, through contact with Iron 7th Division's ground forces, they learned of this person's identity. In the shortest amount of time, they released the button to launch the missiles, pulled up in a hurry and flew towards the southwest. They really did come with a murderous aura, and then they flew away resentfully with their heads down. Perhaps it was an illusion, but the black mechas of Iron 7th Division around the mountains slowly retracted their thick and heavy gun barrels aimed at the sky. The heavily damaged cockpit door was forcefully pried open by a specially assigned engineering mecha. Li Feng climbed onto the platform with a heavy expression and carried out the fellow who was already extremely tired and heavily injured to the point that he couldn't even move a finger. Hundreds of guns and more than a dozen black MX mechas were aimed at them. They looked extremely nervous, as if they could open fire at any moment. In the eyes of the soldiers of Iron 7th Division, although the immobile Su Lu was admirable, it was also terrifying. Li Feng took the specially made military handcuffs from the soldiers beside him and tightly clasped his and Su Li's wrists. Looking at the electrically controlled explosive shackles that the soldiers handed over, he was silent for a moment. Then he cursed under his breath and also handcuffed Su Lu. During this process, the pale-faced Su Lu didn't say anything. He just silently watched Madman Li's movements. Occasionally he would raise his arm with difficulty and wipe away the blood that kept flowing out of his nose. "Don't play dead." Li Feng frowned and said, "If you really want to die, hurry up and say your last words. And can at least get some of your inheritance." Su Lu looked at him tiredly and said, "I'm so hungry." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.